Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm me. You're you. And Mesk
No,
is a cat.
I'm me and you are you.
I don't think so, buddy. You're gonna have to take that fucking nincompoop talk somewhere where poop is allowed. Actually, speaking of poop,
man.
before we get into our main event here, because we're going to be talking about some actual important shit that's going to be actually useful, I do have a humorous anecdote. So, I don't know, skip ahead if you don't like anecdotes. But I got an anecdote. So, lately, dogs have been shitting everywhere outside.
Hey, and that's racist.
We have...
You can't call East Indians dogs, man.
We have... I've bore witness to the results of what appears to be a turf war where my uncles here are taking the shit and moving it elsewhere around the property. I think for the express purpose that they, like, other members of the household will just step in it by accident, and it's like a prank. But it's like a malicious one. Like, they're doing it, they've been doing it for like 2 weeks now. They just keep moving the shit. It's like, you'd think if you moved it, like, you picked it up. So, like, I don't know, throw it out. But they just move it around. I just jump over.
So what you're saying is there's some shitty gymnastics going on.
Yeah, quite literally. Like, first it's jars of piss, and now it's actual literal shit, as Vorgaz would say. That's a good fucking Vorgaz quote. That's a deep lore one. At some point, Chalks was
deep
like...
lore.
Yeah, Chalks is reacting with the one emoji to signify how much IQ Vorgaz still had in his skull. And Vorgaz was like, Chalks is reacting literal shit to every message I make. And so then I made an actual emoji called literal shit, and now Chalks uses that. So it's great.
Was that before or after the calendars caused people permanent brain damage?
That was after. That was because of the... Well, that's what we say the one was. But it was actually the IQ thing that Chalks also invented. So that guy's a meme magician. So,
would you say he's a meme-magician?
Yeah, I would kill myself if I said that, so no. So, anyway, we do have something to talk about that is of actual substance, and that is we're going to be talking about tech trees and skill trees. Lots of trees. Not threes, only 2 subjects today. But
what if your trees are in threes?
Trees do come in 3 sometimes. I mean, Antioch Chronicles 3 had a tree.
That is true. They probably had 3 separate hidden endings of different colors.
Yep. Taken after Mass Effect, of course. So, when we're dealing with trees, we're talking mostly about like RTS and RPG skill trees. I guess you could conceive FPS skill trees or tech trees in the same sense that you would conceive their weapons. Like that would be, you know, what decision-making tree do I have to follow to find a good solution to a problem? But for the most part, people are going to be a little bit more familiar, I think, at least in my audience, with looking at the in-depth tech trees that you can get in an RTS and the in-depth skill trees you can get in an RPG or in an ARPG, depending on the kind of game you're talking about. Like, of course, Path of Exile, a lot of people are familiar with that title, even though I would advise against becoming familiar with that title. You generally have people who know that it has a really sprawling skill tree. So it's a good example, at least, of, in theory, what you got to look forward to. And so we're going to be talking about how to do them well, how to, you know, shit to avoid. Going to give a lot of counter examples. And I don't really know that many examples of tech trees done well in an RTS sense. Maybe, Mesk, you have more to say on tech trees done well, or skill trees, rather, done well in an ARPG sense. But as far as I'm concerned, most tech trees tend to be like, they have a lot of obvious flaws, especially at the professional level. And then either they're designed and they, like, happen into professional grace, which is when you get basically Brood War and only Brood War. And then you also have the situations where people try to design them for professional play, and that's like StarCraft 2, I guess. So that's terrible for different reasons. And then you have the further example of like people in custom content or in lower popular, like more niche RTS titles that design their tech trees for accessibility or some other cancerous buzzword. And so I'm sure like I said, we have a lot of counterexamples lined up here that we could choose from. But at some point, we're going to pivot to discussing the more like conceptual elements of what makes a tech tree and what makes it good. And of course, skill trees as well. And like there's a number of different facets and mechanics you can draw upon. But right now, I suppose we could just broach the topic by talking about some examples. So I don't know if there's anything in particular you wanted to front for this particular discussion.
Tech trees are dumb. In most of the cases I run into them, they're really, really stupid. So the problem with a lot of tech trees is the fact that they are just... There's always like a good solution that's either like very trivial or... I mean, it doesn't matter really if it's like trivial or not. It's just... there's a one glove fits all that's better than everything else because there is only like one real decision. Like there's no real like decision making in most tech trees. Because, like, speaking largely from a single-player perspective, you are never punished in the majority of games for taking the wrong tech. So, the only case I can actually really think of is StarCraft 2's campaign, where you run into, like, Karrakin, who has the invisible immortal shield in the end of Wings of Liberty. That punishes you for taking anything besides Marines, because pretty much every other unit in your army is just useless against her completely. And if you build a lot of defenses, it's basically the same thing. So if you go into that map thinking, okay, so I've gone through the entire campaign building nothing but diamondbacks and siege tanks. Let's do that here. You're just going to get instantly hard countered by this hidden gimmick bullshit. And I think back to, say, for example, Supreme Commander, which is a game that doesn't have tech trees. You just upgrade your structures. The only real tech tree in Supreme Commander, actually, I think, is really just like the economy. That's sort of its own thing. I'll talk about that in a moment, I suppose, because it's more of an interesting idea. It's something I kind of like incorporated into my tech trees. But the majority of games, it's like either like you unlock stuff with researches, which is like a time gate, or it's behind buildings, which usually aren't that expensive. So usually you just take economic openings and turtle on the existence minimum while you tech up, and then that's it. Because in most of the games you're not punished by AI or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about having issues with you were too greedy. So what ends up happening is tech trees kind of really don't exist in single player as a result. They're just a time gate. It's basically like take for example Supreme Commander 1. So in Supreme Commander 1, the vast majority of missions are set up in such a sense where when you complete objectives, the map kind of like opens up a little bit more, and then a very, very, very large amount of pre-placed enemies suddenly attack you. So if you go through that game just clearing stuff to your current tech ability, what ends up happening is you get shit sprung on you, and there's actually a good chance you just instantly die and have to redo the mission. There is actually one mission that is extremely notorious for this. I can't remember precisely which mission it was. I would say it was probably like mission maybe 4, maybe 5. I don't really remember. But it was an annoying mission because any units you put on ledges also had a habit of shooting the ground, because that's great. But basically, you would start, because you always start, there's 3 tech levels, and then I guess you could count experimentals as a tech level in Supreme Commander. And basically, the main time gate for your tech levels is your income. So the most interesting thing about Supreme Commander, and really the only interesting thing about the entire game, to be honest, is the fact that when you build units, you don't pay an upfront fee for them. You pay over time. So you can, for example, start a very, very expensive construction outside of your current economy and work on it as you build up, depending on how many workers or whatever you toss into it, or nanite hives. In the later Forged Alliances, basically you build a wall of nanite hives, and they just instantly build everything for you. So you can build storage to pay some upfront fees, but it's not really so big of a deal as taking locations and having that. In a way, floating money is more punishing in that game than in Brood War, because in Brood War, when you float money, you can still spend that money. So if you supply block yourself and you've got 20 factories, when you get that supply up, you can spend all your money on the 20 factories and build whatever you want. But in Supreme Commander, when you're supply blocked, your income is actually just outright wasted. So a critical part about that is actually making sure that you do not actually float money in that. So it's a little bit more testing in that regards than, say, StarCraft, at least in the sense of like low-level play, because high-level play, Supreme Commander is actually very easy to learn how to play at a high level.
The developers for that game wanted to minimize micro, from what I remember, like in the middle of macro fights. They wanted you to be focusing mostly on spending your money and getting more units, which is why they removed like abilities and stuff like that. From what I remember anyway, that's what some of the developers said in some interviews that I watched a long time ago. So you can correct me if I'm wrong about that Precept, but it seems like that's the direction they took.
Yeah, that is definitely the direction that game took. It's a very shitty game, I'm not going to lie. And the biggest issue with the single-player campaign is, of course, like I said, it's objective-oriented. The mission is completed usually through a set of those stage shifts. But those stage shifts are coupled with usually enemies that have pre-placed spawns that are much higher tech rank than what you started off the mission with, because you usually start off at tech 1 or 2, and then sometimes experimentals pop up, sometimes tier 3 bombers pop up, and tier 3 bombers in particular and artillery are so strong in that game that if one of them gets into your base and you're not able to instantly kill it, they can hit your power structures and you'll basically just lose the map immediately. So, because you will lose the power structures, you'll start losing any shield generators you may have had. If you don't have shield generators, you're probably just going to lose anyways. Stuff like that. So it is, by that design alone, very, very turtle-centric. So what that means is that normally if you had a tech tree, what you would be doing at this stage is saying, okay, so I'm going to attack, and then I'm going to attack. I'm going to turtle. But the game doesn't actually have any tech tree. It doesn't. You just rank up your production facilities so they can produce tier 2 and then tier 3 stuff, and then that's it. There's a couple of tech unlock structures, I think, but not really that much in the grand scheme of things. It's not really that big of a deal.
So because I'm not familiar with this game in particular, is this, or what you're saying is basically that the way that you do it is, imagine if Zerg only could morph into Lair and then Hive, basically? And that would be that way that you
just have a couple different kinds of hat trees, and yeah, that's basically it.
Okay. That's pretty dumb.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And so there isn't actually any decision-making behind it. The most important parts about Supreme Commander are made within the first 5 minutes. Everything after that point, the game just is basically, like at a professional standpoint, the game is basically just waypoint in your base and just hammer your build hotkey. Does the first Supreme Commander even have build hotkeys? I know the second one doesn't. I'm pretty sure it does, but the second one was actually an Xbox 360 port, so there was a lot of things that didn't work properly in it, like control groups, for example. Control groups would always break in that game.
That game has some pretty cool cinematics.
Yeah, the cinematics in Supreme Commander 2 are really good. You guys would really like those. Very, very high quality, amazing, emergent design going on there. So, of course, now we have two problems here. We have two problems in the single-player experience. The first problem is the tech isn't engaging for a player to begin with. The only engaging thing would be the way the economy is designed. But because the missions are so badly designed, we don't actually engage the economy either. The economy is also now serving as a time gate. We've turned something that should have been a portion of the game in which the player actively interacts with into something that is just serving as a time gate. So it's important, especially from a single-player perspective, that when you look at something and you try to make a fucking esport out of it or something like that, that chances are all the shit you're trying to do to try to make player skill expression is not actually going to let them express skill at all. Actually, what is going to happen is it's going to turn into a chore. So take, for example, the macro mechanics in StarCraft 2. Everybody can agree that those were bad. They were just a chore. And they were added because Blizzard realized that their game takes no effort to play, even at a high level. Where, a C-, like David Kim or whatever, he can just, be top tier. And apparently David Kim was the only person in all of Blizzard's company at that point who had even played the first StarCraft before. So that just added insult to injury. But the thing is that David Kim was actually terrible at the game and terrible at balance. But it didn't really matter because he could play StarCraft 2 well. Blizzard likes to make games that they can play well. And since none of them are really actually gamers, that usually means that they drop the skill expression. That Blizzard hates skill expression. But then they realized, wait a second, we want to make this an esport, and people want the game to be, have a skill ceiling, so we can make an esport. So now we're going to add in these macro mechanics. Now, as everybody who has actually seen StarCraft 2 now is very much well aware, they would have been well aware back in the beginning of Wings of Liberty, is that StarCraft 2 set a precedent of separating campaign data from melee data. massively. Because Blizzard realized, wait a second, multiplayer is dumb. We don't actually like multiplayer games because we're bad at games. And the campaign is going to be stretched out across 90 missions. We need to add in some kit bashes so we can pretend we actually have content for this. So we're going to let the campaign have its own set of data because we don't know how to really like design or balance the game. So what we're going to do is we're just going to freeze the data for the campaign and let multiplayer be its own thing that David Kim and his band of nobodies can fool around with. So
hey, not
normally,
nobody. Dustin Browder added rocks.
He also added orcas too.
Yeah.
That's his legacy. He made Command and Conquer Generals too. He's not even in the company, is he? Is he still in the company?
Quit. Didn't he? He bailed after they destroyed the StarCraft FPS that they basically restarted StarCraft Ghost a while ago.
What a wacky, wild fucking career that guy had, where he got the boot from EA because he sucked. Blizzard sucked him up and he still sucked. And then he actually ends up leaving Blizzard. He must have been treated like absolute shit in that company. That's the only way you drop out of something that's literally printing you money. Or Blizzard has just cycled him out like they did Metzen, where they realized that they don't want to have people who are senior staff because they cost more money than interns and they both basically produce the same quality of content. So, yeah.
Just write a JavaScript that lifts ideas off of other RTS games, and you'll eventually do the same thing that Browder did. So, whatever.
I mean, if there's no RTS games to lift ideas from, then it gets a little bit harder. But, yeah, the thing with StarCraft 2 is that normally, like, a lot of people, especially like older individuals, view RTS campaigns as basically something that you're supposed to get the player prepared for multiplayer with. So they're generally supposed to, obviously introduce you to the core mechanics of the gameplay, introduce you to some of the more intermediate topics of the gameplay, like how interactions between units work, how certain synergies work, and sort of like stuff like that. But StarCraft never did that because it kept diverging from the gameplay so much. And when it did have build and destroy gameplay, they really didn't use AI or anything to its fullest. So things just really didn't pan out for Blizzard at all. But still, StarCraft 1's campaign was a much better example than StarCraft 2 because in StarCraft 2 they diverged so heavily, and not just in how the units and stuff behave, but also the tech tree. One of the worst things that StarCraft 2 did with its campaign, other than change around the data and have micromaps and stuff like that, is the fact they had out-of-mission tech unlocks. There was all this shit that you could do outside of the mission that would then influence the mission, but always in ways in which there was a, one glove fits all. The Roach in Heat of the Swarm, for example, the Roach with a slow. A very good example of how not to do any kind of text at all. It's
pretty good. I mean, it just slows
insane.
everything to like 20% movement speed and attack speed. I don't see the problem. I mean, it's not like the unit attacks once every half a second and is ranged. And, by the way, injured Roach is able to borrow regain health. If you haven't seen Mesk's Heart of the Storm playthrough, you missed out on an epic bug. That's all I'll say.
Oh, shit. Okay. Yeah, StarCraft 2 has some amazing bugs in it that are very widespread and probably still persist at this time.
Has anybody tried to add an AI to their lobby recently? No? Oh, you have? You're still waiting? Okay.
Still waiting, yeah. So, what ends up happening with StarCraft 2 is your most important decisions are actually made outside of gameplay. Because in the vast majority of StarCraft 2's missions, you're actually handed a part of your tech, or teching is irrelevant, or you are tech limited. That's also an issue in Warcraft 3. So if there was ever any kind of like decision-making aspect behind their tech trees, they remove it from you immediately. The major decisions you make in terms of concept with all the StarCraft 2 stuff is your various shades of color that you tint your units with. And give them game-breaking stuff, like, for example, roaches that perma-slow fucking everything. But you make that outside of the mission, and it's a fire and forget. Fire and forget is, like, one of the biggest things you want to avoid with a tech tree. because a tech tree is supposed to be about making choices, hence the name tree. The idea behind systems with tree or branch, like take for example a dialogue tree or a dialogue branch, is it's defined by decision making. If you're having a conversation with an NPC and it's defined by a tree or a branch, it's generally insinuated that depending on what choices you make, you end up at different, ends of the branches. Your results change by what decisions you make. The problem with tech trees and single player content is in almost every single case I can think of, regardless of the game, you either can't make decisions, your decisions are meaningless in the end, or the decisions you make don't really have any impact. StarCraft 2 takes it a step further by making some impactful decisions, which are only impactful in terms of a concept. Like when you look at them right up front, it's like, wow, this is incredibly overpowered. Of course I'm going to make this decision, right? That's all made outside of gameplay. So it's nothing you ever actually interact with to begin with. It's just stupid. So okay, so let's take a look at another genre for a moment. Let's take a look at action RPGs. So let's take a look at God of War. So God of War is the hip and trendy American ripoff of Devil May Cry. Now, in Devil May Cry, you had a tech tree in the sense that you unlocked specific moves with your souls, aka red orbs, that God of War also conveniently ripped off. And some of them were dependent on others. Like, for example, you had to actually have a weapon in order to unlock its movesets. But most of them were usually available at the start. But some of them were sort of based on each other. But anyways, you made choices depending on what you unlocked. So say, for example, I want to upgrade Stinger, and then Helm Splitter. Stinger being the dash attack, and Helm Splitter being the jump downward / attack. Or I maybe want to upgrade my ranged weapon instead. So that's a decision. That's a decision that directly affects your gameplay, because the changes those make are pretty important. Now, when we waltz into God of War, you no longer... Actually, I don't remember God of War 1, to be honest with you, but in the later God of Wars, especially God of War Ascension, all of your weapons are basically exactly the same, and the only thing that actually changes is the color. It's a lot like Diablo 3, actually, where your decisions only really change the color that things take, for the most part. And what ends up happening is that your upgrades become very, very fire and forget. You usually have a weapon you're going to favor for most of the game, and they're not really different enough to invalidate any actual decision you make. They're always going to be like, okay, this is my decision, or okay, that's my decision. And then that's kind of going to be it. So in God of War Ascension, which is probably one of the worst action RPGs that I've played in quite a while, obviously, like, Dante's Inferno, stuff like that is much worse. But, God of War is known first and foremost for quick time events and really, really badly done boss fights and grind. And God of War Ascension really takes that to the next level. And its upgrade system, again, you just upgrade the actual weapons instead of unlocking specific stuff. So usually when you upgrade the weapon, it unlocks a bunch of stuff with it. And then that's unlocked by tiers. So what usually ends up happening is your upgrades become a lot less meaningful to you as a player. So you just, say you're going to use a Blades of Chaos, so you just upgrade Blades of Chaos, and that's it. That's all you need, right? And then maybe you'll upgrade Tyrone, who breaks a lot in certain arenas where you spawn Tyrone and nothing actually happens. When we go into, let's take, for example, Dante's Inferno. Dante's Inferno has more like a tech tree in it, actually. It has something that resembles a talent tree from World of Warcraft or Diablo 2. You unlock things through other things. And generally speaking, there's only so many resources you can get in the game, so you can't, unlock everything. But a lot of the stuff you unlock within the tech tree really isn't that great. There's still, always ideal solutions and perfect, setups and stuff like that. Unfortunately, with action RPGs, I actually can't think of a reason to have a tech tree. I can't think of a reason to have resources or things you would, pick up and invest into it. The thing about tech unlocks and getting resources and stuff like that in action RPGs is it's actually a grind mechanism. And the thing is that when you go through these games, enemies typically gain more and more health. So as they gain more health, you gain abilities that deal more damage, and they cancel each other out. And usually the net result is stuff still takes longer to kill in the end than it did in the beginning of the game. Which means that your sense of progression is actually reversed of what it should be. You should be feeling yourself getting stronger over time, but actually you feel yourself get weaker over time because you are not dealing more damage. You are not increasing your ability to kill stuff. When we asked about subjects, Cox mentioned cooldowns. And I think cooldowns and stuff like that actually play a really important role with Techtrees in non-RTS games, because you're going to find that a lot of unlocks and stuff like that are related to cooldowns. So take, for example, League of Legends. A lot of really important breakpoints in the game are for your ultimate. And not just because that makes it do more damage or stun more, but actually because they tend to reduce the cooldown on your ultimate. And for some heroes, that's a really big deal. And cooldowns are stupid to begin with, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, when you level up, which is through, gaining resources and stuff like that, that's an important part of League of Legends. Like that's a really big deal for a chunk of the game, but only really for really specific heroes. One thing that always amazed me about League of Legends is how your team's main tank, the top laner, it was always, at least I don't know about currently, but at least for a very, very long time, it was always accepted that the tank would always be underfed, undergeared, and underleveled because they would be stuck under their turret getting nothing, or they'd be, waiting until like midway or even until late way through the game before they can even go to their own lane and farm because of all the stupid rotation crap that was going on, because it was more efficient as a team to swap lanes and have your dual lane push against the tank who would be just sitting there doing nothing. And the other team would usually just let it happen, and then there would just be a base race effectively. And the tank would just do nothing. They would just sit there and they'd be, stacked on their turret, maybe getting, depending on the hero in question, they might be able to steal kills more safely than others. But usually then you would hit that like 4 or 5 man dive. There was that timing attack that always showed up, and that would be like the defining point for the game, is how well that dive went, if they take that tower and kill the tank, or if they all died spectacularly. And then the rest of the game would just slowly peter out because the team that got ahead from the dive would usually be the team that wins. Because the problem with these systems and these multiplayer games is usually when you get a lead and something like that, it just snowballs off of itself perpetually. The team who has the gold lead and the experience lead, so long as they're, at a comparable skill level to their opponents, they're never going to lose that lead. Because even if they throw some fights later on, in most cases, they have such a lead that it just doesn't really matter. If you start taking a base lead in League of Legends, you just create this perpetual buffer over and over and over and over and over. Every single time you take a little bit more lead, it's the snowball. Your lead just becomes harder and harder and harder to fall from, at least until you reach endgame, where entire teams just melt in like 2 seconds because one person landed a point-and-click CC. Then it gets more volatile, but usually the game is sealed before that even happens. Like the vast majority of games are sealed before that even happens. And you sort of see that in StarCraft 2 as well, actually. Because StarCraft 2, in the small map sizes, that's why you had the Void Ray cheese for so long. Because when one player got that Void Ray out, it didn't matter if the Zerg had queens or anything, they were just fucked. They just couldn't do anything about it. And even then, even if they actually managed to kill the Void Ray, it put them at such an economic disadvantage because they had to do something to counter the Void Rays. Meanwhile, the Protoss can use the Void Ray for map control or killing queens or killing whatever. Even if they lose the Void Ray, chances are it's still done a huge amount of damage. The Zerg player has to know from the start of the game they're going to go Void Rays and either rush the Protoss while they're building their Stargate, or like perfectly min-max their Spore Crawler placement. Because if they go Hydras, they're just fucked, right? And that persisted all the way through Heat of the Swarm. I don't know about Legacy of the Void, but it was something that existed forever. And in large part, it was due to the tiny, tiny Bloodbath-esque maps. Because all the maps were so small that Zerg just were really at a disadvantage for the vast majority of the game. And that led to this cheese, this cheese, because the tech trees just weren't really doing anything. It was like, well, even if you rush me, I can get to Void Rays so fast that anything beyond like a 6 pool just isn't going to really stand much of a chance. So I'm not going to worry about it. And that's why the game was dominated by that. But that also happens in StarCraft 1, like Corsairs. But how many games have been ended exclusively due to Corsairs? Corsairs can't attack ground, so even if you can like completely murder all the Zerg's overlords, they can still build tech, they can still harvest resources. Corsairs are more about map control than outright killing people. It's quite a big difference between them and Void Rays. So when you think about Protoss in StarCraft 2, how many builds do you think they've got? The 4 gate that'll take you to Grandmaster, and Immortals, which are for Marauders and Roaches, and the Void Ray Rush. And I guess Adepts now are also considered very cheesy. You have the more typical like Sentry thing, and then Colossi, and then that's kind of like it, right?
Well, and who knows what's happened now, because they keep changing the game's meta every 3 patches. So
it's super volatile, so it'll never settle. It's the same problem that, again, Relic had this problem with Dawn of War, where they set a precedent of being extremely scatterbrained about how to actually balance the game. So they changed it dramatically every patch. Nobody could ever figure out how to actually play the game, because the game was never the same, next month. And that's really juvenile of the developers. It tells you developers, for one, they don't like their players, and for 2, they don't trust themselves, and for 3, they don't trust the players either. Like, there's just no trust going on. There's just no actual establishment. Because, again, we always return back to StarCraft 1 and look at the fact that meta and the build orders and the way people interact with the tech tree has continued to change well over a decade, 2 decades past this release. And that's kind of fantastic, because StarCraft 1's tech tree, when you put it on paper, it doesn't look that sophisticated at all. But one of the big differences with StarCraft 1 that really sets it apart is how different the tech tree is for each of the races, and how different each matchup plays out in terms of the tech tree versus each other. Like, you're never going to play a Terran versus Terran the way you play against the Zerg versus Zerg, typically speaking. You're always going to treat it differently, not just at the professional level, but at the low level as well. Even if you prefer going, tank rushes or whatever, you're going to be dealing with your tanks and your placement and stuff like that, and the way you handle your tech and the way you get to your tanks a lot differently against a Zerg than against another Terran. You're going to be thinking of it out the gate in a very different way. And the vast majority of games just aren't like that. Like, Supreme Commander is absolutely not like that at all. Everything is so fucking homogenous that it just doesn't matter. And then we go into World of Warcraft. Now, I haven't been following their latest Legacy of the Void campaign for World of Warcraft, but I have heard that they are trying to de-homogenize the game. They are. There was a word for it that they were calling it. I forget what it was. It was a new buzzword they came up with. I'm gonna see if I can grab it. But it sounded like they were bringing back a lot of old abilities that they had removed from the game. Now, since I'm pretty sure only a tiny handful of people in your audience have played World of Warcraft, and probably nowhere near as much as I have, I'll have to give you a little rundown what this actually means. But I'm just trying to find this word that they're using. Man, Wowhead is so desperate for content, they just spam fucking Diablo and shit on top of Wowhead, which is supposed to be for World of Warcraft. And nobody actually cares. Diablo Immortal interview. Like, does anybody really care about what Blizzard thinks about their Chinese Diablo? Eye changes for Death Knights. Oh wow, they're trying to add some customization. That thing that doesn't exist in the game by having some extra recolors. I am searching for this name because it is the silliest fucking name. It is the silliest name. It really brings a lot to the table, and how Blizzard backpedals like fucking crazy.
Well, they did re-add shield batteries to StarCraft 2 multiplayer and lurkers, and I think they're playing with defilers now. I'm not sure if that's actually live, or maybe I know they added that for Nova and stuff. So the idea that they're like, on the one hand, it's like epic callback because we're epic gamers. We played all the good games last century, and then on the other hand, it's like we are out of fucking ideas and nothing we've done has worked. Boys, it's time to pack it up and call Brood War back.
You notice that, like, with everything that Blizzard has done within the past, like, let's say 4 or 5 years, is they realize just how bad they are doing They are just doing absolutely atrociously terrible. Like, their financial situation, apparently a couple days ago they released a 3-quarter conference call, positive mentions across the board. I'm not going to bother looking into the details, but I mean, the public view of Blizzard is horrible. Absolutely horrible. Only their pay pigs are keeping them afloat. They just have some very, very devoted pay pigs. And one of the big reasons why they have such a bad reputation with everybody, casual or otherwise, is homogenization. All throughout World of Warcraft, and I mean all throughout all their games, but World of Warcraft is a really, really great centerpiece for this because it's really the most major thing. They have been working on homogenizing the game. Now, by homogenizing, I mean removing decision-making, removing identity, removing skill expression. So first off, when World of Warcraft released, you had the two factions. You had the Alliance and the Horde. Now, the Alliance and the Horde had their own zones, their own quest lines, their own, sub-factions, their own characters, for better or for worse. They had their own stuff. And that came down to classes. Horde had shamans, and Alliance had paladins. Now, typically speaking, paladins were way better than shamans in pretty much all raid content that I can immediately recall, in large part because blessings were so much better than totems. But, so that meant that as a Horde player doing raiding, we had to think of things very differently than as Alliance did. AQ20, Rajax, we had to restore mana on our raid between his trash waves. Now, normally for Alliance, they just used Blessing or Judgment of Wisdom or whatever, and then people smack the ads and they get mana off of it. But for Horde, we had to entangle one and sit away from it as it slowly died to entangle while totems passively gave us mana. Because we were really, really undergeared and our raid composition was not very good, and most of the players are really bad. So we had to take things very slow. Then Blizzard added a hard timer for the waves, and we abandoned the instance. But the thing is that the factions were different. They were different. So Blizzard said, okay, now Horde can make paladins, and Alliance can make shamans. That was in Cataclysm. Or not Cataclysm, Burning Crusade. They're all the same to me. But Burning Crusade, they said, okay, the Horde are going to get paladins, which was Blood Elves, and I think Turin. And the Alliance are going to get shamans, which was dwarves and Draenei. So now all that was gone. Now they are homogenized. Now all raid compositions would basically be on the same board. Now, just between you and me, limiting classes between factions is kind of stupid to begin with. So I don't blame Blizzard whatsoever for homogenizing that. That made sense. It made sense. If I want to play Horde and I want to play a Paladin, I should have at least some kind of option, right? Like that makes sense. That's just a no-brainer. That's nothing burger. But things got worse. So classes usually had a slew of very long cooldown or otherwise just utility stuff. Some of it was basically there for flavor. And then there was the racial skills, which Blizzard struggled with balancing for fucking ever. Most notably being like Will of the Forsaken, which was basically like a trinket, a PvP trinket that took you out of crowd control. So everyone and his mother who did PvP at that point played an undead rogue. It was basically like you couldn't throw a rock without hitting an undead rogue. And that was largely because Will of the Forsaken was fucking stupid. But there was other racial imbalances as well. I think it was humans had a weapon skill increase, which made a big difference in raid level because the way weapon skills interacted with boss units. Basically, it meant that you would hit them more reliably, I think it was. And that was kind of a big deal like back in Classic. So these imbalances existed everywhere, but they also gave things an identity, right? When you think of Brood War and you think of the units and stuff like that in the tech, it's not very well balanced, is it? Like, Plague is kind of stupid and Irradiate is kind of stupid.
Yeah.
But when you look at high level, does it look grotesquely imbalanced? Is one race constantly winning in an equal matchup? Not really, right?
No, they all have call and response type, certain strategies that they can employ to counter whatever the enemy is doing. Especially at the high level, there's like constant fallbacks, which is one of the reasons why Brood War matches last so long after you think you know that there's a certain decisive victor based on the first couple minutes. Despite
the perceived imbalances of the units, like Zealots is really a big one. a lot of matches really are not decided until, the last couple minutes, which is usually when an entire army is destroyed and there's some other kind of timing thing going on. Generally related to expansions. And then people usually tap out because they don't want to spend the next 5 minutes, watching their bases get blown up. Generally speaking, in a longer game, it comes down to the fact that my opponent has more expansions than me, and I can't defend this, and they're going to attack it. That's usually the game deciding factor right there. It usually comes down to economy more so than the tech, which is kind of interesting. You do see some tech-related decisive moments, mostly come down to, again, cheesing, hidden tech. The pylon and Dark Shrine or whatever in the middle of nowhere, or the Templar Archives in the middle of nowhere, or the Stargate over there, or sometimes they even bait out. They put a tech structure out to get scouted, and then they cancel it and switch to something else once the scout is either walled off or blocked off, whatever. I remember seeing that quite a bit. And then the opponent thinks, he's going to go Reavers, so I'm going to maybe get like Melisk or something like that to deal with it. In reality, they're going to go Storm or something. So there's some stuff like that. But generally speaking, Brood War employs what you would call unbalanced balance, where each race has really, really strong points, but the other races has some kind of answer to that somewhere else. Either just due to how their stuff interacts, which is definitely a very unique thing for Brood War, definitely not something I can think of any analog to at all, or because of just like their own like spells. Let's say in a spell versus spell argument, you have Plague versus Storm, Plague versus Irradiate, Plague versus EMP, Dark Swarm versus EMP, stuff like that. So one of the things I would actually like to point out in this regard in terms of abilities is that in StarCraft 2, you'll notice that there's all those point and click abilities are usually instant kills for their general targets, like Feedback and Snipe, for example, are point and click instant kills for other casters. And that's really stupid, of course, but it's also really, really different from Brood War. Irradiate and Plague are both extremely powerful, but they take time to either reduce units to 1 health or otherwise kill them. There's always that little bit of time. And if you get EMP'd, your casters didn't die. It's usually a disaster, especially at high level, but you didn't actually lose your casters. So if I had a stack of Defilers and somehow Flash snuck through his Science Vessels and actually managed to EMP them, I can try to delay his engage and wait until I have, Dark Swarm and stuff available again. There's other ways, like other sacrifices I can make, but at least I still have my Defilers. I still have the 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, whatever gas investment in my stack of Defilers. I didn't lose them all instantly. I just lost all their mana, which was a valuable resource, and I was out of position, but I didn't lose everything. Meanwhile, in StarCraft 2, it's just like Feedback and Snipe, just instantly killing everything left and right. It's just not as interesting. There's not as many wiggle room for, counter engagement and stuff like that. And the Techtrees, like, all this really plays in hand because basically, your tech moments, getting Ghost, getting High Templar, that's supposed to be like a high point of the game. You reach this new echelon, this new tier, you get something really powerful. So Blizzard feels like, okay, we want our game to be micro-intensive, so let's make all abilities do insane damage and be stupidly strong and have smart casting. And be really easy to use for everybody because everybody is a professional gamer now, XD. And it's just not as interesting. Like, it's just not interesting. Like Dark Swarm and Plague are kind of interesting because Defilers are not very nimble units. And Plague is something that is stupidly strong. But you still have to get your Defilers there to use it, and they just don't get there as easily. There takes some effort to actually land a really good Plague. And you can just as easily lose your Defilers trying to do it, too. So there's just like more interaction in that regard. So there's like more actually going on and for you to really maximize that ability. That's why I hate point and click shit in general. But
yeah, well, notably Feedback on Dark Archon is also exactly like what you were just talking about. So I mean, it is the Dark Archon Feedback is very similar to the StarCraft 2 one.
Yeah, and Yamato Gun too as well. But I mean, both Dark Archons and Battlecruisers are sort of like outliers in this regard. I do not remember ever seeing Dark Archons too much, except for against Zerg. You would sometimes see them whip out the Dark Archons for Maelstrom. Yeah. And that would be really, really strong. The
other issue with Yamato, though, is that it is a charged up ability. Like, there's a casting time, whereas Feedback is literally just... you don't even need to see the Dark Archon that's casting it. Suddenly your unit is just dead or really, really heavily damaged, depending on how much energy it had and how much HP it has.
Yeah.
But you don't really see it in professional play either because it's such an expensive unit, and if you are going to conserve energy on it, you're not going to be using feedback. You're going to be using Maelstrom.
Yep. So, like I was saying, World of Warcraft. So, unpruning. That was it. Unpruning. That's the word I was looking for.
Undoing what we just did earlier.
Yeah, unpruning. So, Blizzard is so fucking soy. They have got absolutely no balls in that company at all. They cannot stand behind any decision they make. Even if it's a bad decision, you've got to stand behind it one way or another. You've got to work with it. And they just don't. They just backpedal and fucking everything. So first of all, they thought World of Warcraft was too difficult for people. Even though World of Warcraft was the most popular MMO, and, you know, it was only growing, and, you know, we reached Wrath of the Lich King, and it's still growing. The Wrath of the Lich King was its highest point and remains its highest point because at this point things go downhill bad. And then they go, things are too complicated. There's too many buttons. Now, to their credit, some classes were a little overloaded on buttons. Warlocks had a lot of buttons. A lot of those buttons were just not buttons you were going to be pushing very often, though. Things like health stones, the closet that summons people, you know, like long-ass cooldowns. Again, cooldowns, I kind of want to segregate that because I know you probably want to talk about cooldowns in some other different vein, so I'll set that aside for now because we will return to this because cooldowns are really dumb in World of Warcraft. But,
yeah,
you know, Warlocks had a lot of buttons. So managing your buttons was kind of like a really big important part about some of these classes, especially Warlocks. And, you know, but World of Warcraft had Lua add-ons for the interface. So managing buttons at a high level was really not that difficult because chances are somebody's made something that will make things easier for you. Even if it's just like visually laying out your buttons differently or whatever, keeping track of your cooldowns or whatever, there's solutions to this. And plenty of Warlocks obviously made it by until Blizzard said we don't want you to play fucking Demonology or whatever anymore. And that was definitely one of the high points where things got really bad. So from then on, towards like Scataclysm and WoD, obviously being WoD, load, they start homogenizing. So what does homogenization mean? Well, it started with making buffs function the same way between different classes. So previously, each class, like say for example, priests and warriors and shamans and paladins, they all had buffs. So, you know, you might hear in reference to like Classic or Burning Crusade or whatever, you know, it's time to buff up before the fight because every class had some little buff. So, you know, each paladin would give you a blessing, like Blessing of Kings. And then if you had Blessing of Kings and Blessing of Might, you were a very, very happy physical DPS. And then if you had Battle Shout on top of that, you were doing pretty well. If you happened to be on Horde side and then you had Wind Fury on top of some of those buffs, But then Wind Fury got nerfed. I think in Burning Crusade, it got turned into just... was it Burning Crusade? They turned it into... They just removed it entirely. Wind Fury used to give people a chance to deal extra attack, I believe. So it was like the big thing about Shamans is certain raid compositions worked really well with that because Wind Fury would make warriors and stuff really, really, really strong. Because before, warriors really like to have... Because the way weapons and stuff work is you like to have slow weapons to get the most out of your attack power. And Wind Fury give you an extra chance to hit, which meant more rage and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure Wind Fury did that as a totem buff. It has been a long time. But Wind Fury totem in general was really great. So you wanted all these buffs. Each class had their own buffs. Priests gave you stamina. Mages gave you intellect, which at the time was just, I think, mana and stuff like that until you got into scaling. And life was good when you were sitting on top of 15, 20 buffs. Especially like the bigger the raid, like you were looking 40-man raids. So filling the slots to get all those buffs in was really not too difficult most of the time. You might like Blizzard really didn't like people picking raid compositions. They didn't like people prioritizing certain classes for their buffs and stuff. And on one hand, I can sympathize with that. Because, you know, maybe some player doesn't really play the game a lot. He's only like got one class maxed out and really like geared for this content. And his raid leader says, well, we already have 3 fucking mages. We don't really need more. So we can't take you along. So that can feel kind of bad. But the insinuation, at least for early on with all these games, is you kind of like talk to people and kind of like work things out. you know? So, you know, Wrath of the Lich King, I mostly rated on, I think it was my warrior or maybe my mage. And that was because of the raid composition. And they had a second group, and they needed a slot, so that's when I'd play on my Death Knight. And then they'd find out that my shittily geared Death Knight did more damage than their best geared raid members. And they're like, hey, we want you to play your Death Knight more often with it. And you bring your own thing, you know? But Blizzard didn't like that. They didn't like that. They said, okay, we got to make the game easier. We got to make it simpler. So now all these buffs start getting the axe in that they all basically like overlap. They all override each other. You can only have this buff. And this buff was actually sometimes, I think, different in some cases. They did this with potions as well. They homogenized potions so you couldn't have a bunch of consumable buffs up as well. And because, again, you know, people in high-end content who are trying to push progression, they're going to do everything they can, right? They're going to use the food, they're going to use the potions, they're going to use everything, and they're going to stack all those buffs together to get their stats as high as possible, deal the most damage as possible, reach certain thresholds. On certain bosses, this was actually really necessary at current content to do. You had to put in the extra mile to get those consumables and stuff to deal with certain fights like Patchwork, who was a boss that scaled. It was a damage race. You had to deal more damage than he did. You had to kill him as fast as possible, because he scaled up over as time went on. So you couldn't tank out that fight. Because eventually he'd just start one-shotting your tank, I think it was, and then he'd one-shot everybody else. So you had to do a lot of damage, which meant bringing consumables, bringing buffs, you know, making sure everything was on point, making sure people were doing the job well. And I believe actually on Patchwork, you actually had groups of mages rolling damage over time, bouncing hate between each other. To avoid taking hits from him. Like, there was some really creative stuff people did, and Blizzard hated everyone. Hated all of them. They hated every single one of these people. They despise creative use of game mechanics, as it's called. And then they embraced it in other respects. So, at the end of the day, the long of the story is that by Warlords of Draenor, I think classes had about maybe a quarter of their abilities left. Like, they just took an axe to fucking everything. And a lot of the old functionality for a lot of stuff just ceased to exist. Like Wind Fury became a straight haste buff, I think it was. So the neat mechanic that Wind Fury had, where it was like an RNG chance to deal an extra attack for the Shaman itself, the Wind Fury buff was actually 2 extra attacks. So, I mean, it was kind of spiky and weird, but it was cool, you know, it was something neat. And in a game driven by RNG, you know, it didn't really hurt too much, but Blizzard still hated it. So all the buffs and stuff like that were now a thing of the past. Now all the abilities and classes work the same. So basically every single class in the game became a rogue. You all had builders and spenders. Every single that's to this day too. Every single class plays the same. You have builders and spenders. So a builder builds up a resource, a spender spends it. The builder does little damage, the spender does high damage. So no matter your class, you're always building up something and then you're spending it. Now World of Warcraft was always rotation centric, but this really took it to the next level. So no matter what class you played, be it the tried and true rogue, or the warrior, or the paladin, or whatever, you are basically effectively building up combo points and then spending them. The warrior remains sort of an outlier because they kept their rage system that Blizzard didn't know how to deal with for basically the entire game's lifespan after Classic. They just didn't know what to do with warriors at all. And the warrior has been the most neglected class of the game ever since it came out. But everybody else, builders and spenders. So, homogeny. The classes lost all their identity. They lost all their real decision making. They lost the little things that they had that really gave them anything. And now, in Legacy of the Void 2, or 3, I guess, they,
Of course it's 3.
They're bringing a bunch of them back. After all these years, they're bringing them back. These random abilities and shit. They're bringing them back after all these fucking years. They're basically saying, you guys are wrong. You don't know the game. Only we know the game, but all of our decisions we made in the past 3-4 expansions were actually stupid. So we're gonna start undoing a bunch of them now. And now they're implementing a level squish, which just like the two item squishes they've done to reduce numbers and then just have them scale exponentially out of control again. Now they're doing it to leveling as well.
Nice.
Like, it would take me a while to even get into that, but remember I said how World of Warcraft had talent trees, just like Diablo 2? Those cease to exist as well. They're gone. As of... was it Warlords? I think it was Warlords or Legion. I don't remember because those expansions are all the fucking same to me. All of them are the same. They removed the ability to make decisions in your tech tree. You just have a level range and 3 decisions between them, because 3. And there's always a best decision between those 3 choices, especially for certain specifications. And you just take that one, again, fire and forget. Like, you ask a lot of questions when you're playing these games. Why level up? Why do you have leveling up in an RPG? For progression, right? To become stronger. Well, that doesn't happen in World of Warcraft because everything scales to your level now. To unlock new abilities and explore your class. Well, that doesn't happen in World of Warcraft either, because you actually start with basically all of your core abilities. So you don't really unlock anything, just some, a couple of extra cooldowns, a couple of extra passive effects. You very quickly run out of excuses for something like leveling up and tech trees and stuff when you're talking about a game whose progression is largely defined by you just spending time. Because if you use tech trees or leveling up or other forms of like time-gated progression, because that's what a tech tree is, it's time-gated progression. If there's not something you interact with during, before, and after this time gate, it shouldn't exist, right?
Well, the problem I see with a lot of RPGs, a lot of ARPGs, and I guess less so with RTS games, just by virtue of them not actually existing anymore, like most people don't make RTS games anymore, obviously, is you'll look at the choices you have, and they do often feel like a false dichotomy of choices. Like, if you have to choose between certain things, like one precludes another, it usually doesn't really result in anything meaningfully deviated from whatever you would have gotten with the other choice. Or it's even worse, where there's obviously one good one and one bad one, or one objectively better one and one niche one that either only has very, very niche uses or is only used by people who don't don't want to play the objectively correct way of the game, which is, of course, their prerogative. But you mentioned League of Legends earlier, and I think that has a lot of that too, where there's ways, like champions that are specifically designed for certain roles. I mean, we talked about the whole support singed nonsense a long time ago, and you still can find a way to have a pocket pick or something that will throw people off guard, but odds are at some point people are going to regress to whatever is meta at the time, and I don't think that that's something that you can really get away from. So I guess my question then, as a follow-up, right, is like, how do we make sure that the choices that our players make, if they're playing an RPG, if they're playing an RTS, if they're playing an MMO, whatever they're playing, actually wind up being meaningful? I actually feel like, they were meaningfully different. And I guess the catch-22 here is, if you make it such that when you are playing, you see maybe another player or an AI that is sort of playing the role of a player use a strategy that you elected not to use, maybe then you could have a situation where the impact of that decision is seen without the player actually opting into it. I'm not really sure how you would control for all the possible variables, obviously. This is all theory. But take, for example, an existing concept that we can look at, which is the map that I've been working on for a long time. Most of the people who are going to listen to this podcast have probably at least seen some testing, if not tested it themselves. And basically it has 7 AIs operating on the map, and a bunch of them, well, all of them have wildly differing unit compositions, if not strategies, as to how to actually take control of the map. They build their buildings in different ways, and they go about stuff differently, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses as a result of their compositions, their build orders, their tech paths, their spellcasting strategies, and all of the other stuff that you would hope to see in an RTS. And you, as a player, come into this, and you probably haven't played much of Hydra before, if any at all. You probably haven't seen detailed breakdowns of what these new units do. You're looking at tooltips or whatever, but those really aren't designed to give you a crash course into what the unit does. It's literally just like artillery strider or whatever. Like it's just a description of what the unit actually is in terms of its combat role. It doesn't give you tips on how to use it. It just simply explains its costs and what its purported role is. And so you know, first couple of times you may be feeling quite confused about the way to go about handling your business with all of these new units that you have and all of the new upgrades and stuff. But you can actually see what your allies are doing and what your enemies are doing, and you can sort of see like what they are doing, how well they are faring against certain other strategies. So you start to learn what your enemy strategy is, and you see what your allies are doing, and they're obviously pre-programmed, but you can still see like, all right, this one is favoring one of the new Dragoon variants, and this one is favoring the new Zealot variant, and you know, this one is favoring Dark Templar, and they've had some changes done to them, and this one is favoring something else. So, as you can see, just based on the way that the AI take the map and take fights, you can sort of see how these units evolve. And obviously, the AI are not going to be using them very well, at least not compared to what a player will be using it, because that's just how AI works right now. We're working on fixing that, but it's going to be a while. But it'll still give you at least some understanding of what that unit's combat capabilities actually are without you needing to opt into making them yourself. And I wonder if there's a way to do that so that you can see, like, I wonder if that would work for my playstyle. You can get some information as to that. I mean, the corollary, I guess, in this case would be in PvP, or I guess in PvE. You would look at, in World of Warcraft, some situations where your opponents are using a different build or a different skill set, and, you know, they go down a different skill tree. But I'm also not really sure where else you would go from that. Like, is that a fallible solution because of the fact that the gear isn't 100% visible, or how does that exactly work? Like, if you were trying to figure out if your strategy was working properly, or if you needed to adapt something from another person's strategy to your playbook, I don't know how you would exactly do that in any of these existing games. And that's a big part, I think, of allowing players to express their creativity, is they play around with some concepts. They go into a game, they try to support Singed or whatever, or whatever they end up doing, and you know what they come away from that experience feeling is, in terms of their victory, how well their performance was it a defeat instead, what difficulties did they face, do they think that they could pull off the same thing again, do they think that they could improve based on this strategy? That stuff is deeply important, and I feel like most of the time the players aren't going to fail a single player RTS mission, and they're probably not going to fail against most enemies. And if they do fail, it's probably not because of their strategy as much as it is like their strategy may have worked completely differently to different degrees of strength or failure, depending on if they were fighting like a human player or a more fair AI player, because most missions are not designed to favor actual like straightforward RTS gameplay. And the same is true for like boss battles or other such things in RPGs, where like there can just be some situations where you walk into an area like in Half-Life, which is obviously an FPS, not an RPG, but you walk into an area in Half-Life and there's just a bunch of enemies that are like way higher than you, and they deal hit scan damage, and they know where you are immediately, and of course you're gonna fucking get obliterated. Like that's sort of a foregone conclusion, and like that's not the same thing that would happen if the situation was different and you had time to scout out where they were, as a corollary to RTS gameplay. So in a roundabout way, I suppose what I'm asking is, like, how do we make sure that players can get information on how effective their strategy is compared to other people without it resulting in like a leaderboard or some other weird shit where they have to look it up online? How can they just simply have a decent enough gameplay read based on how they are, faring in the game, or how their allies are faring in the game, in order to decide if their decisions have had any weight? And like, obviously this is assuming that your decisions have weight in the first place, but like, how do you communicate whether or not they made a proper decision from a tech tree standpoint? Obviously it's a very open-ended question, so I don't know how you've
I would hope it's from them succeeding in the mission,
right,
and finding themselves having success against their opponent. I would hope that the interaction in itself is enough of a read. Like, let's say I decide to go Marines, and the Zerg builds Lurkers, and I get my Marines destroyed by Lurkers. That tells me, well, maybe my decision to invest heavily into Marines at this point was not good. Maybe I should have tried something different. Or maybe I need to have different placement, or maybe I need to rely more on scan or other stuff like that. Like the interaction in itself should be the read. I think that if it's designed in a tight enough way where I decide to tech and the enemy takes bases, it tells me that, okay, so I decided to play more defensively and my opponent decided to play more aggressively. So now my opponent has an advantage, but I have tech. And now the opponent's probably going to attack and I'm not going to have the economy to handle my tech. So maybe I need to balance my tech more. Like that, those are the kind of interactions I would look to promote. There should always be some kind of mechanism to drive that interaction and have the interaction readable in a sense. Now, again, like we look back at Supreme Commander with this example, that doesn't exist with Supreme Commander because everything in the mission is very static, right? Like in order to actually proceed to the next phase of the map to spawn your next opponents and their pre-placed crap, you have to usually like destroy something or fulfill some other objective. So you can literally just sit on that and max out your tech tree and have 1,000 experimental units waiting for them. And the game encourages you to do that by springing stuff on you when you do switch it, which usually tends to result in you getting destroyed if you have just barely, completed that objective for whatever reason. So that's like you can even think of that as a read, right? Like you can think it because it is a read. It's a read in the sense that I should have turtled before I did the objective. Like it teaches you that pretty early in, is that you should turtle before doing the objective. So that's a read in a sense, not a good read, but it is one. In that the interaction was you completed the objective and then shit got sprung on you and you got your cheeks clapped.
Right. In that example, that's like, you have to fail in order to see that you made the wrong decision. And of course, that's more like Simon says in that case, because you're not allowed to progress until you reach a certain Excel sheet, like you were talking about earlier. Yeah. Like you can't win unless you have this, X number of resources worth of units in the right positions. And of course, we're all opposed to that. But I wonder if there's like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is when presenting your tech trees to your players, like you don't want to overload them with information. You don't want to do it in the way StarCraft 2 did it, where they have all this shit in tooltips that you click through in menus outside of the game, and then they're researched forever, and you never have to worry about upgrading in the middle of the mission. And that's terrible, obviously. And it's fire and forget. So you want your tech tree options to be there, and I guess at that point the best way to handle informing the player of that sort of thing and informing them of, like, giving them the information they need to decide, is this a right move? Is this a correct move? Is this a move that can help me win? As far as the tech trees themselves are concerned, that you probably just have to tutorialize it over time, and there's not really like an easy way to do that.
I use the AI. I would use the AI as an element. So tutorialize over time is a good way to put it in one respect. But the other is I have my opponents and my allies play like players. So they build up over time. And they tech up over time. So let's say, for example, we talked about my StarCraft 2 campaign a couple of podcasts ago, and I talked about that first bunker rush. So that would be actually pretty low tech. You as a player would have access to some higher tech, but generally speaking, you wouldn't have the time to actually really access it. Unless things really like turtled out between you and the first opponent. So between you and the first opponent, the first major engagements are going to be done with just like Marines and SCVs and bunkers and stuff. You're probably going to not be able to build a factory right away. I mean, you can try to, but it's probably going to end badly. Well, maybe you're really good and you can still do it. Like that would be something you do if you're more experienced, you're a little bit more educated. Maybe you failed once or twice. You got a really good build order down. But as time goes on after that, like you start teching and your enemies start teching. So your enemies are going to start attacking you, and they're going to be pretty low tech early on, and you're going to be pretty low tech early on. And then you get like free up your ally spot, and he'll start upgrading and attacking as well. So at this stage, you play it like you would a regular game. So one of the main things I try to think of some of this stuff is that there's multiple stages to success. So another analog would be DMC versus God of War. So in DMC, in the harder difficulties, all the way up until GMD or whatever, enemies usually have to hit you several times in order to kill you. Whereas in God of War, in the higher difficulties, you can basically like lose 3/4 of your health or more in one hit. And Dante's Inferno, a lot of stuff just outright one-shots you. So basically, like those are very Simon Says, because your interaction is very binary. Let's say you already understand the fight, but you didn't play it absolutely perfectly. You mistimed something, which is going to be the case with Dante's Inferno and that last boss, which is an absolute fucking shit show. And then you get bopped, and you're dead. Now you have to do the whole thing over again. Not only does that feel really bad to play, it's also not really educational. It's more like constantly getting bitch slapped by a malicious developer, because that's precisely what Dante's Inferno was. It was a product of maliciousness. Whereas one of the things I noticed in DMC is you have to actually fail quite a bit to die. So whenever I review the virtual fights I had a lot of difficulties with, I will find that my death predominantly comes with doing a lot of really bad mistakes and not playing very well over an extended period of time. Because virtual doesn't really like unload a huge boatload of damage on me all at once. And you do have a couple of get out of jail free cards, like you have the devil trigger that let you regenerate some health and become a little bit more durable and stuff like that. So it is something that, you have to fail several times. There has to be several steps to his success, and there's several steps to your success. So I also think of many fighting games in that regard as well, but we are actually going to revisit fighting games in this respect, because there's two sides to this coin. One is good, one is very bad. And as in, say, for example, BlazBlue, in order to win a match, a best of 3 or whatever, there's usually several stages to your success. And one of the things is like your burst, which I'm pretty sure, I don't remember too much about BlazBlue, unfortunately, but I'm pretty sure your burst is one of those things that persists in its cooldown between matches, whereas stuff like your heat gauge does not. It resets. So I have Byte 02 start and then Byte 02 start 0, 0. Why on earth is there 2? They're the fucking... What? Why would you do this? Why is there multiples? Oh my god, what did you do, you piece of shit? Okay, I'll have to deal with this in a second. I actually have to go piss really quick. I'll be back in 1 moment. So when I think about introducing players to mechanics and stuff like that, obviously I was targeting a very high-end player base, but I also understand that, hey, there's a lot of different stuff in this project. It really doesn't even resemble StarCraft 2 in any shape or fashion. So adapting to it's going to be hard, and we're going to start off very high-paced. But we start very high-paced in a very controlled environment where things are still very low-tech. So you really only have the aggression and stuff like that to worry about. Stuff like harvesting resources, building barracks and supply and stuff like that. Everybody who plays this campaign is going to already understand how that works, so it's not really too big of a deal. When you go through the mission, like say, for example, after this rush is dealt with, after you've done flailing around with it and all this other crap, what you're looking at doing is taking control of the map, expanding, and then taking a breather back and maybe reading some tooltips and figure out how stuff works. And I wasn't going to have very extensive tooltips either. My tooltips were going to be pretty simple. Throughout that, your opponent's going to be attacking you and stuff like that. It's not going to be the biggest, most aggressive attacks right away. And as they attack you, you're going to see new units, and stuff's going to change a little bit. As you go through this process, you're going to be experiencing more and more of the game. You're going to be experiencing the behavior-based engagement and stuff like that. And throughout this process, you're going to be, getting comfortable with the actual map position and stuff like that. So I think of difficulty as a scaling thing. So as you go through the missions, they get more and more difficult. Your opponents will be more and more aggressive early on. You'll have to deal with more complicated unit compositions and larger scale opponents, more opponents at a time, more difficult resource circumstances, and other stuff like that. And you may also have to deal with like map bosses and other such things. But early on, it's fairly well paced. It's still going to be something that requires a high degree of execution, because you're going to have to actually pay attention to what's going on. And that can be kind of difficult because you're trying to learn the game, right? So, it's kind of expected you're probably going to fail a couple times just because you're just sort of paying attention. So things should feel natural to play early on. Things should be natural to evolve into. They shouldn't require anything extravagant. Like your opponent's attacking you. You need to defend yourself. That's very simple. Anybody can do that. Or, I need resources, let's expand. That's very simple. Anybody can do that. Anybody can understand that. So we try to focus our engagement concepts on those sort of like fundamentals, let's say, the fundamental features. And the fundamental features are saying stuff like, all right, so the opponent is playing an RTS. Let's treat it from a very high-level, superficial standpoint in which we build resources, we harvest resources, we build units and structures and everything of that nature. And then we can worry about the more complicated stuff like our units with point defense and artillery and stuff as time goes on once we're used to it. So our opponent scales to us in the sense that our opponent starts low tech and techs up as we tech up. So because they're playing the same game as we are, they're not, arbitrarily handed a whole bunch of crap. except for the one guy that'll have some production structures, but he doesn't have like the tech or resources to sustain it at the moment. So you still get an opening on him. Because they're playing the same game as we are, we can scale it in such a way and say, okay, so by the 20, 30 minute mark, we're probably going to see our opponent start to hit like tier 3, maybe tier 4. And by that point, the player will probably fumble this point to that as well, because there's only so many things the player can actually do. The player is not handed a giant fucking, menu with 1,000 point and click abilities and buffs and other things to read. When you start removing stuff like unnecessary upgrades and techs and all this other really strange shit that Blizzard has just become obsessed with over the years, every unit has to have some fucking active ability. When we remove all that stuff, it gives people a lot of breathing room and what to actually think about, which means then we can start worrying about how units actually interact and behave and making those unique and making their actual engagements unique. And those are much more natural to play around than active abilities. Active abilities go against almost every single thing an RTS sets on the table. They just really should not exist, at least not in abundant quantities. Only things like Defilers and High Templar really need to exist. Anything beyond that, once you start throwing in shit like adapts and all this other crap, and adept sentries, both in the being same sort of tech level, is really, really bad news, on top of the fucking other unit they have that explodes. There's just all this shit just all tacked up together that just becomes a chore to manage, much less learn. So then when we throw that into the AI and stuff like that, now we have like many, many different threads of thought that the player has to keep track of, which from a learning perspective, they're going to have a hard time even figuring out even what to focus on. So if all of our interactions are very simple and innate, like we have a Marine, he has a shotgun, he attacks slower than a Marine with a rifle. Like, that's like a no-brainer, right? Like, that's going to register in your head immediately just by looking at the graphics. It's read to the player immediately. They're going to understand that right away. Hey, my Marines attack slower, have shorter range, but do more damage, so I want to get close to deal damage. I don't have to worry about pushing a button or anything like that. It's all about how I control the unit. And since that's right in my face, it's not something that pulls my attention away from what's going on the screen. That's going to line up nice and tightly with, I've got to build my base, and I've got to harvest resources, and I've got to make sure I deal with the enemy attacking me. All those things play together. They're all core part, I can English sometimes, of the concept that we're playing in RTS, right? And then we have our micro as well. Because our units have identity between each other, we have micro. Our Marines have shotguns. We got to move them in. We got to make sure that our enemy doesn't kite us. We got to make sure we get the jump on them so we can make the most out of them. Like, that's just going to be the basics that every player understands just by seeing the units fight each other early into the game. Where it's a high pressure environment, but it's not as high pressure as I've got to learn all these spellcasters, I've got to figure out how to use this hero, I've got to worry about the hero dying, I've got to worry about this timer, I've got to worry about Rainer's friggin' alcohol. All this other shit just tacked on, all these other gimmicks that are going on. They usually distract your attention from the RTS, which is why Blizzard just doesn't make RTSs, is because they prefer gimmicks anyways, because gimmicks level the playing field between people of different skill levels. Everybody has to play the gimmick rather than playing the RTS. Since we take the inverse route and say we don't want gimmicks anymore, that means we can make our actual game mechanics actually mean something again. And since our player doesn't worry about gimmicks anymore, like timers and shit, they can actually pay attention to what's going on. And then we scale up our mission. We scale up our mission just by extent of the fact that we're playing an RTS. We don't have a ton of pre-placed crap. We don't have the player worrying about 500 pre-placed ghosts with nuke, EMP, mind blast, on-hit stun, 15 different types of grenades, feedback, and merging into Metzen's chin. We don't have to worry about any of that shit. It's just our enemy builds stuff and then we build stuff. We can worry about our ghosts and their overkitted fucking, Goku skill set when they come up later in the game, when we're more prepared as a player to actually deal with them. Not just in terms of our tech level, but in terms of our exposure to the project. Because we scale up over time, and because StarCraft is very well paced, as long as we don't diverge too heavily from what makes that what it is, then we can introduce our new stuff in piecemeal throughout the course of the map. And the players will eventually adapt to it.
You mentioned that you were talking about tutorializing the game and also not really introducing new overhead for the player to deal with until they were already acquainted to the game state and a bunch of other things. And I think that is important, but it also broaches a subject that we promised to discuss on this particular podcast, which was like specific mechanics. You mentioned active abilities that, mechanics to avoid, right? At the beginning of this podcast, I said, we're going to give you some information on what to avoid when it comes to handling tech trees and even skill trees and stuff for other games. But of course, focusing on RTS, as this is an RTS-focused man. So basically, active abilities, I'd say cooldowns for any sort of ability or behavior. That sort of stuff is usually something you want to stray away from. It's hard to look at anything unless it's a fucking QuickTime event or something where you just say, absolutely never do this. Because, of course, there's going to be certain situations where it makes sense, like, some Defiler abilities or some Science Vessel abilities or whatever. Certainly ways that those could be improved. I took a bunch of them, and I, for example, for the Science Facility, or Science Vessel, rather, I actually removed EMP Shockwave, and I made it an upgrade for Irradiate, so that Irradiate's timer is much less now, so its time to kill is much slower, but, and it also deals overall less damage, so you can't, one-shot Overlords with it. But it is a spell. Since it's the primary spell of the Science Vessel now, it's not like you have to conserve energy for other things. And EMP Shockwave is cast at the end of its 8-second duration. So with the upgrade. So the idea being that your unit, you can irradiate your own mechanical unit, like a Wraith or something, fly it in there, cloaked perhaps, and it'll cast EMP. So if you really want to hit those casters and they don't have any detection, that's one way to do it. Instead of dealing infinite damage to everything, it deals 100 or 125. I don't remember exactly. I think it was 100 damage to shields and to energy. So it doesn't just melt them completely. But you can get around this just by doing irradiate on 3 Wraiths and then charge them all.
3.
And that will bring an Archon down to 10 HP, and then your Wraiths will still not kill it because Wraiths. But that's an example of ways that you can change them, of course. But still, the idea of designing units that are specifically meant to be spellcasters, I think, is a little antiquated. Obviously, some of the more thematic elements of races can be sort of crystallized into feeling like they are. Spellcasters can feel like a crystallization of their race's, ethos, their themes. Like Science Vessel seems very, very, quintessentially Terran, for lack of a better term. It reinforces a lot of their gameplay patterns where they have siege tanks that like to siege up, so you defense matrix them. And when they're facing organics, the idea that you can use Irradiate not only on enemies, but also on your own units, that also helps. And, maybe EMP Shockwave's a little weak, but I think that the first 2 abilities that it has are fairly strong. And then you compare that to also Ghost, like anti-mechanical. Okay, sounds fine. Lockdown, right? And then you have Wraiths that cloak, Ghosts that cloak. Nuke Silo, of course, which is a weird kind of active ability that's more like a channel. More like a behavior, I would say, than an actual active ability, but it is still point and click. It's more of a niche for sure. You can look at those and say, all right, these are very quintessential, and really these units are not very useful outside of their abilities. Ghosts are very, very niche in the sense that they deal concussive damage, so they're not going to be very useful against most army compositions, and they're very gas intensive, and their researches are very gas intensive. So yeah, good luck trying to make effective use of them at the highest levels of play, or at any point where you're trying to be competitive in the current state of Brood War, at the very least, that we all know and love. So what I'm getting at here, anyways, is you'll have examples of spellcasters and specialist units that are mostly only used for spellcasting. Very rarely does their weapon play any part, like the Arbiter, another good example. But I do think that it's possible to make something that's a bit more like the Corsair, which we referenced earlier, which does have a very game-changing ability in Disruption Web, but also is mostly used for its attacks in the early game, in the current state of Brood War. That is a combat unit. It's not purely a unit that casts spells. It's not purely a specialist unit. And I think that it's a better example of the kind of direction that you would want to go, actually, compared to the Science Vessel or the Arbiter that's mostly used for spells. I do think that spells and abilities like them, they can have a place in an RTS, but they should probably be, at the very least, reserved to higher tech levels. And that's just because in an RTS where you're building a lot of units, you don't want to make it so that players need to sort of forego all of the action economy that they have and say, all right, I'm not going to build units. I'm not going to build buildings to build units. I'm not going to expand. I'm not going to do any of that shit because right now I need to click a lot for this fucking spellcaster to be worth its money. Like, you don't want to tie the efficiency of the unit, the operational efficiency of the unit, to clicks that, like, a disproportionate amount, I suppose, of APM required. That's where we would see, arguments against using queens in, to effective use in multiplayers. That's 100 gas plus 100 for broodlings that you could be using towards, defilers, hive tech, something else. And when you get enough queens that they can cast broodlings, yes, they one-shot tanks, yes, they one-shot Goliaths, but and yes, to that extent, they do pay for themselves as soon as they kill a single tank. But is it really worth it in that sense when you have to spend so much APM just to get them there and then to evacuate them effectively after the fact and all this other stuff? And most people have decided it is not very effective, and so they don't do it. And that's why they're very rarely seen. So that would be an example of like a unit. Obviously, there's like other examples of units that in StarCraft that are not good in the sense that they don't really fill very many niches, like scouts. Those scouts do actually exist for multiplayer purposes. Unlike most people would have you believe, there's some situations where you want to open with a scout as opposed to a Corsair, just because of certain openings, though it is very map specific.
Manor openings.
You have to kind of make a map that is expressly for the purpose of bringing out Devourers and Scouts because of the way that the map is designed. Like an island map that favors Zerg, basically. That's been a more recent revelation. As is an interesting bug where if you click on a pylon that's being built by you, for some reason, like when you deselect it by shift selecting it at a certain time when it's constructing, you will just... Well, if you do it too slow, you crash your game. And if you do it too fast, you actually select an enemy building that's in production. And you can see if it's a barracks or a supply depot. It's the most recent enemy building.
Fucking what?
Yep. Well, it selects the most recent building that's been placed instead of the one that you were trying to select. I don't know the details. I'm probably butchering the explanation, but it is pretty fucking wild.
Yeah, that sounds like a memory being accessed in the wrong way.
Yeah, so like the idea is if you're selecting a building, like you're basically selecting the most recent building, and if it tries to select and they're like your pylon is the most recent building, then it overflows and selects a negative building that doesn't exist and crashes you. Which is why so people have just been like, when this bug was more recent, people were just deciding, I just won't build anything for the first 2 minutes and it'll crash. So that's cool. Only with Protoss. Only Protoss bug. I don't know why. Anyway, outside of that humorous little tangent. I believe that's just a default bug. I have no idea if it's a remastered specific one, but very funny. Look it up. Pylon crash, I don't know. So... Yeah, outside of spellcasters, of course, are a sticking point. We also talked about cooldowns, and these are, of course, very intrinsically linked to abilities, because very rarely do they pertain to something that is more of a passive feature. I don't know how you feel about cooldowns on passive features, but I have a suspicion that it's pretty much the same thing as cooldowns on active abilities, although at the very least, if it's a cooldown and it's on a passive ability, you don't have to keep the overhead of, I have to cast this active ability and wait for the cooldown. You just have to keep the overhead of the cooldown, which is pretty much the same thing that you do with weapons, because of course weapons have cooldowns as well. So perhaps there's an argument to be made that you can do something more like that, but even so, I think I would rather tie it to something like energy generation, where it's like mana or energy, where a behavior that consumes energy in a different way. I do this all the time in Hydra, where like there's an ability, there's a unit that doesn't generate energy as fast as other units, or at all. I don't remember the current state of it, but basically the thrust of it is that it has an ability that siphons energy from enemy spellcasters, and when it has energy, it attacks. It can attack ground units. Normally, it's a melee anti-air unit. It can attack ground units at range and deals concussive damage. So it's very effective at sniping workers and other small units. So who knows if that's going to be effective at all? Like that might just be a failed experiment. That's an example of a unit that uses energy to fuel its weapons, and its attacks actually subtract 10 energy each. So that is a very like APM sync unit, because you have to cast an ability in order to get a weapon, but they still have a purpose otherwise, which is anti-air, and they're like fairly nimble. So they're going to be fairly effective at doing what they need to do if you just field them as anti-air skirmishers. which Zerg obviously doesn't have by default. So they just have the Devourers, which are very fucking slow and very late game tech. So, specific examples aside, I guess we can just talk about cooldowns and abilities more broadly. And we can talk a little bit about those and how they do or do not, and mostly do not, fit into the larger scope of an RTS.
Yeah.
And maybe why people keep fucking putting them in their games, too. Like, what's the deal with that?
Because they're bad at games. They want a button they can push that just instantly solves the game for them. That's usually what it comes down to, is that developers are bad at games. They want a way to win at their own game. Beat the janitor. So the way to do it is to implement non-game mechanics.
Pretty epic.
Pretty epic. Yeah. My experience with cooldowns first started with Diablo 2, which they introduced exclusively because of performance problems. Because once you had FCR, the game basically became absolutely impossible to for really. I mean, even like their netcode couldn't handle it, and their fucking people's computers couldn't handle. Like Diablo 2 just performs like absolute shit. So their solution was to just implement cooldowns onto everything so that you can use as many spells. And then somehow that got abstracted into a gameplay mechanic. This is the same company that nerfed Lightning Mastery when Firewall was overpowered, so you can figure how well that went over with people. And now it became the standard for their games, is just cooldowns and everything. Now StarCraft has some cooldowns. Most notably, the Defiler and I think maybe Yamato Gun. A lot of these cooldowns you don't really run into unless you're using some kind of like cheat or something like that, or you've looked at
there's
the
a
data
cooldown
or
on
something.
Storm and Irradiate, which is pretty common because of the fact that those are 75 energy spells. But yeah, most of the abilities don't have cooldowns.
Yeah, so cooldowns did exist. They're sort of just hard set in there, and they're not really telegraphed to you. Some of them can be sort of long, but not really that long. In fact, I'm not even necessarily sure if they were actually like intended to have a cooldown or if it was just something that was just left over from early in development nobody really thought about, but they do have it. And then things got worse and worse and worse and worse. Conquest Frontiers is a game that is much more like what you're thinking of, with only combat units. Like there really isn't like a hard dedicated caster unit. Almost every unit in Conquest Frontiers has one active ability. I think that missile cruisers had stealth. It's been a while since I've played that. The carriers had something, I forget. But some of them are really, really important. So the Zerg race builds, they're mostly carrier-centric. And their large carrier, the Tiamat, has a ability that creates a shockwave that pushes units away from it. Enemy units, that is, only. But it's a very persistent effect. And it doesn't move, though. So you basically sit in one spot, you use this, it keeps a lot of enemies away from you. And the whole idea is that you sit there with the carriers and you pelt them, and you restrict all their close range ships from being able to get nearby. And it uses supply, though, is really the main thing. So there isn't like a hard set cooldown from what I remember. It might have had a short cooldown, I don't recall, but it just used supply. So that was one of the few games that uses supply. Very similar to Earth 2150 in some ways. You have supply ships that have an aura that gives you supply. You can think of it as just like energy. You need energy to attack. It's not something you really see too often in RTSs, but this game does do it. So what ends up happening is that what you can do is you can have a lot of carriers and a lot of supply ships, and you can burn this repulsion wave in a giant area, and basically you can basically cover the entire map in what is effectively like unpassable terrain, and just keep units from ever being able to engage you. So it's one of those cases where like you have a really strong ability, but under the right circumstances, because of the fact that this doesn't have a cooldown, it is absurdly overpowered. It just fucking breaks everything. So that's usually the typical argument behind implementing a cooldown is something is too powerful, so it has to have a cooldown. But a slippery slope in which you are already free falling off of. Because now you've implemented an ability that is so stupidly broken, your only way to actually balance it is by making it so you can only use it every so often. That's a stupid concept on paper, much less an implementation. It should be avoided at all costs. You know, one of the great examples is Stasis Field or Stasis Barrier, whatever the fuck it was called, the Sentry uses in StarCraft 2.
A force field?
That is one of the dumbest abilities that's ever been implemented.
You're talking about gravity, whatever the fucking...
It's the wall
Guardian
that blocks off ramps.
Oh,
it's the
you
wall.
are talking about force field. That doesn't have a cooldown.
Yeah, force field. Yeah, no, yeah, it doesn't have a cooldown. It's an ability that you just spam when you got mana, and it is absurdly fucking broken.
Yeah,
it is one of the most broken abilities I've ever seen in an RTS.
Especially for StarCraft 2, where the pathfinding system compels units to clump up together and makes it even more ridiculous.
But it's especially because StarCraft 2 and ramps. Because this is terrain models in which we typically use ramps. So if you're on the wrong end of a ramp, you are actually powerless to do anything about this. So long as he's got mana, you can't get off that ramp. You're fucked. Unless you are late enough in the game that you have a unit that can crush it. Like, I guess, Ultralisks and Colossi or whatever. But at that point, chances are, by that point, the game's already decided anyways. That's the thing. So that really doesn't count. But most often it just comes down to either your units getting stuck in a hole because force field will push all their collision on top of each other, or it's ramp stupidity. Like it's just a stupidly strong ability that shouldn't exist, and it doesn't have a cooldown. So you might think, well, just give it a cooldown and it'll be balanced. So that's how they handle a lot of things now. Is that just give it a cooldown and it'll be balanced. That doesn't work. Doesn't work because it just takes one force field to succeed, right? So what you end up with is the League of Legends syndrome, where a lot of people just refuse to engage until they've got their cooldowns up. The thing in League of Legends, and one of the reasons why these games stall for such a long time, even though the win conditions are effectively already met for one team, is they don't want to engage. Now, why wouldn't they want to engage? Because they don't have their cooldowns. Say there was some skirmish in the jungle and they killed a supporter or something like that, but it took, 2 or 3 of their ultimates to kill him for some reason. Say they misplayed it really badly. Now, the enemy team is still incredibly far behind. They could be, 5,000, 6,000 gold behind, where they really have no chance of really winning up front. But the first team, they don't really want to open up a way for them to win. Like, making risky plays on the back foot when you're otherwise ahead is both unnecessary and, really ill-advised, right? Especially when there's, prize money on the line. You want to be closing your games very confidently. You really don't want to give your enemy the chance to do anything. But at the same time, your enemy is not in the position to really, push the advantage onto you, because you have such a huge advantage in them in terms of, money and levels and stuff, they can't really do anything. But you are held back because you're on a cooldown. Some of these cooldowns can go up to 2-3 minutes. So there will just be these long periods where nothing is going on because they don't want to commit to something without their cooldowns. Now, these cooldowns can be pretty important. Things like, say, Nautilus's ultimate that we brought up before. It's a point-and-click CC that'll CC anything that's in the way. It's a really, really important ability. But there's a lot of abilities like that are basically fire and forget, and they're effectively game-changing abilities. They're instant kills, effectively. If you get hit by Nautilus's ult in the middle of a team fight, or a team fight's initiated in a bad way with Nautilus's ult, that just ends the game right there. 15 minutes just ends. Because a lot rides on that one CC ability, because things do so much damage that in the 2 seconds that you're stunned, your entire team will probably die. So we enter this arena where we have these abilities that are insanely powerful because of how much damage they do or what utility they have. And rather than going back and making the game about interaction, we throw on cooldowns instead. So one of the things we see with a lot of these really utility-heavy heroes, like Thresh, for example, is we see a lot of balance stuff come out for cooldowns, where we increase their cooldowns. They're really powerful abilities that transcend what you would normally think of as a number, a radiate doing 75 versus 150 damage or whatever. We have all this utility expressions that just can't be represented in the same way you think about damage and stuff like that. So what ends up happening is instead of reducing their utility, we increase their cooldown. where they become super, super, super binary. And that really actually only increases the toxicity of the play pattern. Because basically with stuff like thresh hooks and blitzcrank hooks and stuff like that, what you end up seeing a lot is people fish for hooks. They fish for success. They just throw them out, they miss, they run and hide, they come back when it's off cooldown, they throw it out, they miss, they run and hide, they come back when it's on cooldown, they throw it out. It's just not interesting. But when they finally land the 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 hooks, even at a low level, that usually results in an instantaneous death. It's usually an instantaneous death. And it's just annoying as fuck to play against. It's really, really, really annoying as fuck to play against. The longer the cooldown something is, the harder it is for both people really to keep track of it. And the more powerful it is as a result, the more stupid it seems when it actually happen. Suddenly Blitzcrank landed his hook and that's it. You know, the 20-minute lane in which we were winning, we've now just died and now they're going to take our tower. Like, it just feels bad to play against.
Well, it's a pretty hefty cooldown on you respawning on top of everything else. So
yeah. Like it's one of those things where it's not just your death. Like, you lose the experience, you lose the money, they gain money, they gain experience. If it was a lane in which you were otherwise winning, you throw all that away, they get the comeback bonus. Like that, that's why the early game is the biggest deciding factor, because at that point, it can make a big difference. It can make a big difference to throw that early lead, especially to something really, really stupid and random, like suddenly this terrible Blitzcrank actually lands a hook, and then that's it. Maybe his ADC is really good and he's really shitty. As long as he just lands that one hook, that's literally all he needs to do. He's very, very binary. He lands a hook, he succeeds. He doesn't land a hook, he doesn't succeed. Everything he is based around landing hooks. If Blitzcrank is always landing hooks, then it's going to be really, really bad for you. If Blitzcrank is never landing hooks, then he's just dead weight that's actually holding his team back. And what you want to do right off the bat is avoid that, right? Like, you want to avoid that kind of interaction where you always have to succeed in order to make it worth it. You always have to have that success, and then you lump all of your power budget into that success.
Yeah, it should be
you lump all of the value.
Yeah.
You lump all your value into, like, irradiate is sort of like half an example. Because when you think about it, in professional play, how many times have you seen players desperately try to split Meleesks? And they may have 300, 400 APM. Splitting the Meleesks still takes a long time. The one Irradiate, the 175 mana or whatever spell, just did like 500, 600, 700 damage worth to the Meleesks. And now because the Meleesks are all low on health, even if you split them and only lost the one Meleesk, you took so much fucking power budget in terms of damage that you really can't use those Meleesks anymore for a long time, because if they fly into Marines or something like that to try to snipe a science vessel, they are just going to die because they're all so low on health. So you still have the Meleesks, but they're reduced to the point by this one spell that you just can't use them unless you let them regenerate or whatever, or you kill them to free back your supply or something like that. So like, the one spell cast, the one fuck up and getting hit by it costs you so heavily in certain circumstances that it's just absolutely absurd. So usually, like, you'll see the Zerg build Meleesks, and then when the science vessels come out, they just stop building Meleesks. Completely stop building Meleesks, because they're effectively hard countered by science vessels at that stage.
Yeah,
at least at the high level.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Scourge, you really can't irradiate Scourge. Like, you can try to, but it's just not worth it. They're not going to live long enough for them to stack up. They're not going to be stacked up a lot of the time. The Zerg's not going to keep them out.
Is a spell with a spell cast timer during which the while the spell is the spell is applied instantly. It is a one click targeted spell, but the science vessel is frozen in an animation during its cast. So casting it is a death sentence.
Yeah. So when I think about like RTSs, I think about this in every single way, whether it be an ARPG, it's because I'm designing some stuff like this in the ARPG as well. But in an RTS, it's all the same thing because they're all very interchangeable. I think of resources as something other than cooldowns. So, energy and stamina and mana, stuff like that, that's really a no-brainer. But animations is a really good one. Animation lengths is a really good one. So I mentioned before that in the RTS, you're going to be able to build capital ships and battle moons and stuff like that have a lot of guns and they're really strong. And how I focused on like behaviors and stuff like that. And then I was going to implement things like anti-missile systems, anti-ballistic systems, and artillery and stuff like that. And I implement all these things, and one of the questions I ask myself is, okay, so a player has this unit, or this structure, or a group of this stuff. What can the enemy do about it? What is the enemy supposed to do about it? Do they just throw an equivalent number of shit at it and hope for the best? Or is there some kind of counterblade they have available? So the anti-missile system is a really big one, because there would be things that target specific kinds of projectiles. So currently in StarCraft 2, you have the Raven's defense drone that targets all projectiles. It destroys everything, which means it cripples anything with projectiles, which is why it's incredibly overpowered. Whereas in my project, defense drone equivalents would only target actual physical missiles that realistically could shoot down. So you're going to have a really hard time shooting down something like a railgun slug or a laser, but you will have an easier time shooting down an actual missile, like a torpedo or something. So it would make sense that you could have some kind of anti-missile system that would target torpedoes and stuff like that. So maybe you can't shut down all of the ship's point defense guns, but you can shut down its long-range artillery that does a lot of damage and give yourself a little bit of breathing space. And then the enemy has to do something about those defenses if they want to get the absolute most of their unit in this one specific spot. So it's all about your placement and stuff like that. So again, I think back to Conquest Frontieres, where you had some really powerful abilities, but they were kind of static in what they did. And how their power budget was really calculated really depended a lot on positioning. So when I think about active abilities and cooldowns and stuff like that, I avoid cooldowns entirely as much as possible. I think of another way to manage their resources. If it's something that I feel is too powerful, that it has to be something that's arbitrarily limited by a set amount of time before you can use it again, I redesign the ability from the ground up. Because that's just not an interesting play pattern. Waiting for a timer to tick down, that's not interesting. That's not interesting at all. If I'm trying to replicate something, as in something actually cooling down, like a barrel overheating, I should have some kind of actual behavior or interaction that is, as a result of that is influenced by other elements. Now, I haven't ever implemented something like that because I never thought of a place where that actually made sense, especially when we're talking about the space age, and a lot of our stuff is firing in vacuum. And we're talking about advanced materials and advanced fabrication techniques. In advanced technology where barrels and stuff overheating probably wouldn't be nearly as much of an issue. But if we were to implement something where you have a Yamato gun or something like that, and it had to cool down before we use it again, we would think of it as perhaps its cooldown is linked to your other weapons. So if you were always firing your guns, and now you needed your guns to fire something that was much hotter, like special fireball incendiary rounds or some shit, and that was going to heat them up even more and put it on cooldown, we could say, well, if you're not firing any of your guns, the cooldown is much shorter. So now that's something that actually requires you to actually interact, or it's something that at least benefits from your interaction. And it's something that also at the same time makes sense. Right? Like you stop attacking, your shit cools down faster. You continue attacking, your barrels are going to stay hot, the cooldown will be longer. Now it makes sense. Now we've turned something from just a cooldown into something that's actually sort of a mechanic. Now you mentioned passive abilities. One of the things I would avoid with passive abilities down to the grave is what Riot does for everything every 3 hits. Yeah, I would avoid that. Every 3 hits, something happens. Yeah, avoid that. Avoid that at all costs. And then avoid random chances on top of it. Unless you're doing something like Armageddon Onslaught, I guess. Where you're trying to compensate for the AI not being able to use stuff. Then it makes sense to have some sort of special random stuff to compensate for it. But in terms of stuff the player controls, you want to take out random chance. And you want to take out data management, basically.
Yeah, so the thing about the hits on certain things, I mean, it's a kind of a weird example, of course, but I do have the relics that I showed you some podcast episodes ago, where I was the hero equipment, basically. And for those, I feel like it sort of bucks the trend because it's not meant to be a unit that's mass-produced. It's literally one-of-a-kind thing that only one of them can even exist in the same map, even if there's multiple players, because the whole point is that the relics are one-of-a-kind. And so you have a hero, and a bunch of heroes can use certain relics, and a bunch of heroes can only use others. And, some of them may have a weapon that... It's not really like every 5 things or so, or every 3 things or so something happens. It's more like... this weapon applies a stack of something that can then be detonated or consumed in some other way by some other unit or by some ability that the hero has or something like that. It's a little bit more freeform, and it's a little bit more like just applying a new mechanic to the unit. But I do think that in general, this is a harder thing to get right than just simply sticking to more basic precepts, most likely. Like, it's one of those things where you really have to balance it out with what makes sense for the player to deal with and how can they handle certain other things. Like, for example, making sure that the overhead, the design overhead of that unit, and their abilities or whatever is not too high. And here's something else that, as you called him, Cox, that's my favorite new nickname for him. Cox said that at some point, or he linked me to some page at some point where he reworked random chance to hit on height advantage, which is how it behaves in Brood War. He reworked that for his melee mod to behave in such a way that it would, every fifth hit would miss or something like that. And it would be for every single unit attacking every fifth attack from any given unit. So it would be like unique per unit, as opposed to just being every fifth attack on a particular unit, where you could maybe force target. If you have 5 Marines, that 4 of them will hit. It's more like, the first attack always. I think it's the first attack always misses, or the first attack always hits, or something like that. And then it's a pattern. My issue that I took umbrage with that was most of that, like, trying to remember any sort of pattern for something like that, when instead of you could just do some sort of basic, consistent thing that isn't random, but that is always like the same way, and it's not a pattern you have to remember. Seems like a lot to ask for players when they're also trying to juggle a bunch of other things. Like, we were talking about action economy earlier, which is another big thing, but it's like, in trying to compensate for the removal of random chance to hit. I do think that's something to remove in your projects, is anything random in general, like you mentioned, but also, like, trying to remember that the player has to deal with a bunch of other shit.
That's why I said data management. That's right. What that is.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like another example. Not to shit on Cox, of course, but some Germans like shitting on Cox, so you never know. But
Scat's a big thing in there.
Yeah, well, they took after their dear leader, I guess.
Mm-mm.
He was into poop. I don't know if you knew that. Hitler. He's a nice guy. So
he was a nice guy.
Basically, what it comes down to at the end of all of this is, I do think that you should try to, like, the thing is, I don't want to encourage people to just stick with only the basics and only the simple things when it comes to designing tech trees, right? Because obviously tech trees is a huge subject. We can go on and on. But I feel like, as a designer myself, I actually go in areas where explicitly I have not experienced anything like what I'm designing, because that's what makes it exciting to me, is I want to see how it shapes up. I want to see what it looks like at the end of the day. And that's part of the whole allure, is being able to say, hey, I wonder how this is going to work out. I wonder what this is going to feel like. And I don't know. I just feel like the answer doesn't have to be lying in simple things, but there are certain very high level understandings of the game that can help you when you're designing something. Like, you could just take it for granted that cooldowns are not useful, because you've played so many games that you have had cooldowns that you know to avoid them. You can take it for granted that cooldowns, or rather active abilities in large quantities, like in Warcraft 3, for example, only work, and even then I say work with many air quotation marks, because of the fact that there's a low scale. So if your RTS has a high scale in terms of number of units fielded, then you have to remember the player's action economy. You have to remember the player's limit. So you can take those things for granted. Like, those are pretty much established ideas in the space. Like, people knew that before we made this podcast to educate them on those topics. So even if they didn't articulate it per se. So coming away from that realization, or that explanation, I wouldn't necessarily say that you have to make sure that your tech tree concepts are simple so that the player can understand them, because you do want to respect the player. You do want to understand that they can handle, very high-end, like high complex things. They just need time to adapt to them, and they need to be read properly just from the gameplay, and they need to be able to learn that without a tooltip and stuff like this. I think once you control your information, you can pretty much do whatever you want, as long as you're staying away from things that are provably and proven to be toxic to the experience of playing an RTS, which are like cooldowns and like other such things. Like, you gave the example of the force field as a thing that is broken despite not having a cooldown. And the counterexample that you gave was, even if it had a cooldown, it would still be broken because the ability on its face is broken and needs to be redesigned. And if you're thinking of balancing it by putting a cooldown on it or putting charges on it or something like that, then you've already lost. Like, I think kind of the same thing could be said in a much lower level of impact about spider mines. Like, I don't really understand the idea behind, you know, having a unit that has a limited utility in terms of, you know, it's not that it requires energy to deploy mines. It requires, you know, there's just 3, because 3, and then you're out.
3.
I actually think a better system would be for it to require energy, and you just turn the unit into a spellcaster, or you refuel them somehow. But then that requires you to, you know, patrol them back to base, and that's less autonomous, and that's also more gimmicky, I would say, because of the fact that it hasn't been established, and you're not establishing it anywhere else. And that's another thing that we can definitely talk about is when you're adding a new mechanic, how does it feel grounded in the systems without sounding gimmicky? I actually have a really good example of this, but I don't know if you wanted to jump in on any of the other points that I said before we go into that. Okay.
No, go ahead. I'll address them in a little bit.
Sure. So, I've got an idea for you, ED Commander. So you, ED, is going to be a new race as opposed to just another faction in Hydra. And one of the ideas that I had to set them apart was actually to make them, like, completely divest them from the normal set of mechanics, not in the sense that they don't mine anymore or anything like that, but the way that they build structures is going to be different. And it was partially born because DF and I were talking about a way to make it so that in an RTS, factions built structures differently than what we see in Brood War and what we see in other RTS games. Like, trying to find other ways to make building, because as is notable for Brood War, there's completely different ways for building structures. Protoss warp them in, Zerg mutate drones into the structures, Terran build them over time, and their workers vulnerable during that period. So there are all these 3 distinct ways to build structures. Surely there's got to be more than 3. Metzen can't get us again. So how do we make sure that that happens? Well, an idea that I came up with was that you would be sending resources back to your main structure, as you do with all other mining, but your production would not happen from your workers, per se. Your production would actually happen through a different a submenu, because the UED is invading. It makes sense for them to have a giant fleet, and their flagships would be the ones that are, or their operational ships or whatever, would be servicing your situation. And so you would actually order your buildings down, and your units as well, but your buildings would serve as drop-off points, more or less. Your buildings would be ordered down as call-downs, similar to Command and Conquer, I suppose. If you're familiar with that series, the way that they did building is you built them when they were ready, you just deployed them full stop, and they had some sort of animation before they were ready to be used as they were deploying. So this is the same idea for the UED, is that they will drop down in drop pods or something like that and self-assemble over time.
That sounds kind of like the infantry guard in Dawn of War.
Yes, so the worker, or the units in Dawn of War appear over time, or like they get called down in a drop pod of some kind. Whereas, like, in this case, we're talking about just all buildings behave that way, and then the units would, I guess, have some sort of visual indicator for the structure that they were dropping in, or they were teleporting or something, because you know, Terrans are shown to have short distance teleportation in the installation map, so it makes sense that the UED would have a more advanced version of that. And at this point, you're just dropping down like relay nodes or something for your production structures. That could be manifested as well by having them take up less space than conventional production structures. You know, there's any number of ways that you could approach it, but the idea is that you're giving them a central theme of actually having most of their assets off-world, and in order to deploy them on-world to have a foothold in an area, they do so in a very different way than other races do. And of course, this is highly different than everything else. So I guess a good starting point for us right there is, like, how do I make sure that this mechanic in this case remains integrated, feeling like it is an actual part of the game and not some gimmick? And obviously, like, one of the ways that you respond to that potential criticism is, well, it's something that's consistent with every single time the UED are there. Like, that's how their race operates. But more broadly speaking, just or perhaps less broadly speaking, perhaps more vaguely speaking, the feeling that you get from certain new mechanics is that maybe they are kind of gimmicky. And part of that could just be that you're not used to them, because you're expressly not, because they are new. And everything else is, not necessarily unchanged, but more familiar. And so like that was one of the things I feel like would be useful to pick your brains at, because I know a lot of other people who are interested in developing their own tech trees have also grappled with this, and surely you have as well, trying to figure out some way to make your new tech trees and your new races and your new behaviors consistent with a holistic vision, because you're obviously working with StarCraft 2 where nothing is really consistent and everything's a gimmick, but you want everything to be tied together. In this case, I'm using like the base of Brood War and then trying to find something that's still tying together. Myself reinventing a little bit less than you had to do for StarCraft 2, but still reinventing all the same.
Yep. I would definitely take a look at the Infantry Guard. They use drop pods, and basically they drop down like containers, and then their construction animation is basically to like assemble the container, and then that's it. So they were an expansion race, so it wasn't something that was shipped with the original race. Right. And so that was kind of different, and I think the Necrons summon stuff out of the ground or something like that. So that was
it's like undead from Warcraft 3, sort of.
Yeah. So those were some interesting animations, and they fit in, and they look pretty decent, and they were still very consistent with everything like that, and everything else is. I mean, a lot of stuff is based on drop pods and that, so it's and there wasn't really much base building in general, so there wasn't like a lot of wiggle room, but it was still something that. Certainly like an interesting idea to take off of. So I think that it definitely can work. I don't see any like real issues with it. So I think that you'll be fine with that. It'll come down to making the art look good. The landing animation for the units on the structures, you could have landing pads on them that like open up and some steam comes out and some lights play and stuff like that. And then the actual, like when they're completing animation, the drop pod lands and the unit spawns or something like that. So that would be one way to do it. And with the structures, you probably have some idea in mind visually speaking. So that can work out. I think it'll be fine. I don't see any particular problem with that. I think that probably the Infantry Guard building animation is probably like the best way to go for the in construction progress, so that you have like an accurate visual representation on the field of how large something is going to be. If anything, for enemy players who are maybe seeing in construction buildings, you have Zerg have varying structure size animations for their construction, but Protoss really don't. So one of the things I would do is
intend to eventually change so that it's more obvious just at a glance what kind of size you're looking at. But
so that is something to consider for your animation as well. Is how big and what is my in construction graphic actually going to be? Am I going to drop the drop pod and then construct it like at the Infantry Guard, or is the drop pod going to come down when it's finished? If so, then how am I going to represent that? So
I was thinking
both of those things are really important.
Well, it's more like a short form or short distance teleportation in this particular case. So you would actually have like the sub menu that controls your building this is the most gimmicky part of the whole thing right now, is like the least grounded part, is that you actually, in order to build your structures, you're not even selecting workers. You're just pushing a hotkey or selecting a new UI element in order to open up a build menu.
That's actually how Armageddon was going to build.
Oh, okay. So you already played around.
So Armageddon didn't actually, because they didn't harvest resources.
Oh, okay.
They would actually curse resources so that they became unharvestable. And but they built their structures through units or buildings rather. They didn't have any actual dedicated workers. So each of their temples could basically spawn warp points, kind of like Protoss. So it was kind of like your main building was a probe, except they couldn't move. And then that would spawn structures, and then the structures would warp in, and then you would have your gateway. And then the gateway would bring in stuff through a subspace rift. So it'd be kind of like Protoss, but visually very, very different.
Right. Yeah, the visuals in this particular case, I think what I want to do is, like, when you have the menu, you'd see the build queue. Also, when you have that menu selected, it would be there, and it would show you, like, the structure in progress, the progress bar or whatever. But the other thing is, I have to fuck with the UI a lot, because my idea is that since you, like, the big sticking point right now, you don't have multiple ways, like, you don't have ways to make it so that you're building more than one structure at a time right out the gate.
Yeah.
So you're gated by that. So your build times are actually going to be reduced compared to other races in a sense. And you'll be able to upgrade your ship, probably through some upgrades at maybe the main hub or some other tech structure. But you'll be able to upgrade your orbiting vessel to fit it out with additional like this would be more for more than just this, but like you'll be able to make it so that maybe troops deploy faster globally because they have more, troop training facilities on the vessel, and there's like only so many slots on the vessel that you can outfit, or only so many times you can upgrade. So you decide if you want to, build buildings faster, or units faster, or research faster, or whatever. There's a couple of different ways that I'm going to go about doing that. But at the end of the day, the ship becomes a very like heavy mechanic, despite never really being seen in the game, which is like one of those things that I'm mostly worried about, that from a visual standpoint of reinforcing the idea that this is where most of your shit's coming from, and all that. And maybe I guess a drop pod would help sell that a little bit more, because the whole point is, the pod pops down and that it came from the sky. Whereas if it's just, warping in at the end of the build time, or it finishes, and it basically, like, the way that it was going to work is when your structure was ready, you would then be able to select the menu and then select the build structure again. And instead of building it, it would highlight as if you were building it conventionally, where you can see like the green boxes. And you would then deploy it in a certain location, and then they would have an arm time of like 5 seconds maybe 5 seconds at like the max for like a high tech structure, which would warp in or drop in. So like something like that, I think, reinforces it a little bit better. As far as reading it in for your enemies, like that's going to be a tough one, because I don't want to do build space, which is what Command and Conquer games do, where you only have a certain amount of space around your units or your structures to build more structures. I want them to be able to build anywhere. And so I have to make sure that it's not too broken, but also not too limited in the way that you can't build enough. Like you can't build quickly enough, because the way that your race works is basically completely different. Your workers are purely for harvesting and scouting, as opposed to also for building. So
what I would do, if you want to stick with the graphic thing, I have in my head something kind of like the Star Trek beam down.
Right.
So you would have like a column of light.
Right.
From what I'm understanding, is you first build the structure and then you deploy it.
Yeah. So it gets built off screen in the sub menu, and then you'd have the structure complete sound to tell you that it was ready, and then you would go back into the menu and play it.
So what I would do. This is what I would do. So what I would do. This is going to be a lot of asset work, but I would have, during your construction, is the teleporter is on your main structure coming down from above. So you have an animation that has like particles and then a beam coming down onto your main structure. And it doesn't have to be like very dominant, just enough to show that something is coming down from above in the form of some kind of energy column.
Right.
And then when you actually construct from your main structure, you have a beam come up very briefly and then come back down where your new structure is. And in that shape, the shape of it would be basically the shape of the structure you're building, but obviously, warped. So you would look at Star Trek jump and teleport animations and stuff like that as kind of like an inspiration. Maybe Stargate as well, I think, had a couple of ship teleports that might fit that. There's something I can't remember where the fuck it was from that was basically one-to-one with what I'm thinking, but I don't remember where it was. But then, when you're watching it, the main structure, then you can see that warp graphic, and it'll be in the shape of your main structure, and that will give you a little bit more grounding of what's going on as well. So
it's funny you mentioned the beams coming from the main structure, because the main structure is actually going to be like a grav lift or a space elevator type thing, but it was obviously, because the idea of a space elevator in this context where you're doing warfare, like somebody could just suicide a scout into it or something and blow it up, so that wouldn't work from a conceptual level. What I had in mind actually was like a giant, your main structure basically being a giant like railgun cannon type thing that pumps resources out, like shoots them right into the ship, and the ship tractor beams it in or something after the fact. So that way you intercept, you get rid of anybody intercepting it. And so the idea being that they are beaming resources up in a sense. I don't know if it'll be a beam or if it'll be like what I was describing, but something non-conventional that shows that the resources are going up. I think that would be a fine way to show that there's, like, if you have vision of the UED's main base,
if you can have events, if you can make an event, a custom event where the structure receives resources, you can have a very, very faint graphic. You could have one of, say, 8 or 10 or so overlays, and it randomizes between them except for the one that's currently playing. You have any number of these playing every single time your resource. So say your railgun has like a bunch of little smaller barrels on it or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Some way that you can have random different animations. And you just spawn one overlay for every time you return a resource. It'd just be very faint, but something if you're watching, you can see them actually going out.
Yeah, and it would have like faint sound effects of some kind, if it would have any sound effects at all that would sound like cannons pumping out or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something very similar to that in theory anyway.
It's something that can, I think, work, but you're definitely going to need to bring in some custom systems for it.
Yeah, well, we are talking about Brood War here. It's going to be a nightmare to try to fucking put together on a code-based level, but that's what I have Ukrainians for.
Freedom fighting in their own way.
Hell yeah. But I mean, as far as like a jumping off point for that specific example, have there been struggles that you've had or struggles you've seen where people are fighting against, the preconceived notions of what their base game is or what the RTS genre is as far as that sort of thing, and they're trying to make something that is innovating in a sense? Like, I hate to use that word, but in a way is going in a different direction than we have historically and trying to do it well. Has there
everything in Warcraft 3, I guess, in some vein.
Yeah, I guess.
They just look at the RTS and like, we don't want to make RTSs. Why are we even here? We ask a lot of questions. In some cases, what would be? I guess Black Desert Online. Like, if I think of RTS, I can't really think of any on hand. Most people who try to change from the RTS do so because they're shit and their result is shit. Like, vast majority of like Command and Conquer and stuff like that, they change things from StarCraft because they don't understand StarCraft. So the net result usually is not very good. But when I think of ARPGs and MMOs and everything else, really what comes to mind is actually probably Black Desert Online. And they struggle a lot, very, very heavily. So Black Desert Online is an MMO. And it's a Korean free-to-play MMO, and it's very heavy on the pay-to-win and stuff like that. But at its heart, it's an ARPG like God of War, DMC, and stuff like that. And a lot like Terra, if you're also familiar with Terra, it's very similar. It's basically a clone of Terra, except they decided to go a lot more heavily into fighting game mechanics. So the actual control system and stuff like that for Black Desert Online is worth bringing out. I have a video that shows a little bit reasonably well enough for a demonstration. And it's actually really quite interesting that they've taken the fighting game controls with positionally dependent inputs and all that other stuff. And a lot of iframes. There's a lot of iframes and all that stuff. And they put this into an MMO. So Terra was one of the more major noteworthy MMOs at the time because they broke away from the trend of World of Warcraft clones that use, it's called tab targeting. But it's basically like hit scan shit that is always focused on whatever you're targeting. And they implemented more similar of a free combat system, push an ability, you attack in a direction, and an actual hit collision, like what you expect out of an RPG. The main reason why you don't really see that in MMOs is because netcode actually really doesn't support it that well. When you are talking about an MMO, you're usually talking about a lot of cheating. A lot of MMOs do stuff on the client that they really shouldn't. That's World of Warcraft's biggest issue with cheaters and bots and stuff like that is, when you're a bot, you can go and say, okay, so I'm going to change this memory address to say my location is here, and now I'm actually here, and the server will just accept it. So Blizzard tried to fight this by putting in some kind of algorithm, I think it was called like a sanity check, to see, why is this person here? If they're here, disconnect them. But Blizzard's implementation is so fucking bad that there's many parts on the terrain that if you just jump on, it actually trips the sanity check and then disconnects you. So there's this one tower in Alterac Valley that it every single time I went there, it would disconnect me from landing on a ledge because I think it would see my collision was under the ground because of the way the angle was, and it would trip the sanity check and it would immediately DC me, and it would keep DCing me every single time I tried to log back in until finally it updated and I could actually get back on. By then the battleground was over. So there was
sanity
a lot
checks in Blizzard are never going to be actually sane. They're going to be the opposite of their name usually. Like shit in they updated sanity checks for the AI in Brood War with Remastered, but they didn't actually change anything with the AI. So custom AI just got fucked out of nowhere and would crash. So that was cool.
Yeah, it's it's an issue, but it's something that you deal with in MMOs because, the MMO infrastructure, you've got the server and then potentially 1,000 or more clients to any given server. You've got to distribute all this information, and it's not necessarily a question is the hardware powerful enough or whatever. It's can the infrastructure at a software level actually handle it? So one of the things that HKS has been struggling with a little bit in the earlier stages of making our D&D client is that while we can send certain information at a very fast rate, that's really nice to have at a fast rate. Like, say, for example, revealing Fog of War. That's something that you want to have updating constantly. But what actually happened is you'd end up saturating the netcode in such a way that other information couldn't get through because of the way the information was being transmitted. So it wasn't like a huge bandwidth cost. It's just the way in which the packets were being sent and the update rate at which the packets were being sent over Steam. You would just block out other information. So when you are painting Fog of War, you could no longer move your camera because that was being attached to a player controller, and that was also being synchronized off the server. So one would actually cloud the other one, and the other one would just stop working while you're painting Fog of War. So that wasn't very good. So that had to be addressed. The update rates had to all be changed. So imagine that times 1,000. So what developers do, in large part because they don't like designing workarounds or, problem solving, is they get really lazy and they just say, we will trust the client for certain information, and then maybe try to sanity check it afterwards sometimes. So now you have World of Warcraft and bots teleporting around, bots forming URLs out of their bodies. And actually, one of the interesting things for Classic is they didn't actually know how to implement a sanity check for it anymore. So, because I guess all the staff that did that kind of development are long been kicked out of the company. So what they did is they just changed it so you can no longer have bodies hanging around anymore. So bots, this was exclusively to fight bots who would build URLs out of teleporting bodies in the air and then dying. They just made it so that the bodies didn't stick around anymore. So they just broke the game instead of solving the problem or trying to do anything really. So that tells you stuff. So when we go to Black Desert Online, we have a system built around fighting game mechanics and hit test and more ARPG related stuff. This is way more intensive in terms of netcode than something like World of Warcraft. And something like World of Warcraft, the server really doesn't handle that much at all. World of Warcraft is actually very, very cheap on server resources, at least until PvP comes in hand, which is why they made Battlegrounds, was to get people out of world PvP because it was killing their servers. Because their servers are like 20, 30 years old. And they have dramatically dropped their amount of servers since release. So they're even more intensive on certain client-side stuff. But this is a problem with Black Desert Online. They're actually more intensive on client-side behavior than World of Warcraft is. So now you have a game where there's the unit count in it for monsters is actually very high. So one of the things you'll notice in MMOs is they're very loosely populated by monsters. World of Warcraft, when it released, had a few high density areas. Those were all removed in their updates. And all their new areas have all been low density. So this is, again, exclusively because their servers are crap and they don't want people killing monsters in large numbers because their server can't handle it. Well, surprise, surprise. What you can actually do is spawn infinite cockroaches inside Ice Crown and cause the entire server to hitch by casting Demoralizing Shout on them. That's in one of my videos. Good times. So that's something they obviously didn't account for. But Black Desert Online has a 1 to 2 second delay on you doing something, such as moving, and it actually registering on the server. So in my video, I have some fantastic examples of this. For example, I jump up on a rock to punch a unit. But in Black Desert Online, you cannot do damage to something if it doesn't have line of sight of you. So what happens is, even though on my end I'm standing on the rock and I'm punching a unit, on server side, I'm not. I've gone through the animations of jumping, standing, and attacking already, but on server side, I'm still on the ground. And this is not a very high rock, mind you. So on server side, I'm not actually hitting the unit. So on client side, nothing happens. I don't actually deal damage to the unit. Nothing happens. So this is a game that's most lauded for its PvP. In an infrastructure where you have multiple second delays between stuff actually registering. So a lot of damage registration for a lot of monsters in the game and some other stuff like Dark Rifts, which are these really shitty bosses, is actually all done on client side, and the server just accepts it. And there's probably more stuff being done on client side that really shouldn't be, but the server just accepts it. So this was a game that actually was really interesting because of its control mechanisms and stuff like that, but they didn't build any sophisticated PvE for it at all. And the PvP is an absolute joke. because of iframes and the latency and stuff like that being absolutely insane. Stuff is just unfucking believable in how desynced it is, where you can be running around in a town and there will be invisible walls of collision for up to multiple minutes because the server hasn't actually updated your location and is still loading collision meshes for you for some reason. And the client doesn't know what to do, so you're just running into invisible walls. It was one of the most insane bugs I've seen in a long time. There was people trying to do something that was really interesting, and they just didn't really actually think things through in so many different ways. They're more interested in getting people to pay for microtransactions than they were in actually making the core fundamentals of the game really functional. So that's like a 2-hour-long video. If it really interests you, I highly recommend you look into it, because summarizing it's going to be too much. But
it sounds really like they were taking the mechanics from somewhere else. They thought maybe it would be interesting to put it in here, but that wasn't their full focus. Their focus was making money, so it didn't end up manifesting positively.
Yeah, so that's like when you ask an example of people trying to explore things and not really working out, that's really the biggest one that comes up, because a lot of the other examples really just are like the developer is an idiot. But this is an example where I think that had the netcode been better and had they not been building in the current year, which is all microtransactions and manipulating your consumer rather than being honest to your consumer, I actually think it would have been really good. I think the controls and the stuff in that game are actually really interesting, and I'm actually taking some draws from that for my game, and thinking about what felt good to play in this and what didn't feel good to play in this. And one of the big things about it is the lack of cooldowns for the most part. There is a couple cooldowns in it, but the vast majority of it is just based on your inputs and stuff like that. So that was a nice break from stuff like Terra, which do have a lot of cooldowns built into that control system, and it just feels really awful to play.
Any examples from your own travels as a designer and a developer trying to make something that, well, maybe it was successful, maybe it wasn't, but was wildly different, and ways that you tried to make sure that the mechanics that you were adding or the ways of interacting were still grounded in whatever the core of your project's identity was?
Most of my projects, to be honest, I always tried to do something different that then wouldn't work out. Armageddon Onslaught, for example, the AI was very, very fucky, and a lot of stuff I tried to do just wasn't actually possible. I wanted projectiles that changed movement speed over time. That wasn't doable. And the AI would do stuff like build multiple of the same unit when it shouldn't have. It was ignoring its defined maxes and stuff like that. I had a lot of issues with the AI just deciding to build multiple Malashes, and one Malash can wipe out the map, so that didn't really work out. The Great Destroyer, lots of problems with that unit as well, because of the Wraith. When you make a Wraith, the engine graphic stops appearing. It's because sometimes with air units are given their move command in quick succession, it doesn't actually fire the iScript header for moving. And for the Great Destroyer, that is where it sets its movement speed. So it would actually hook the unit in a state where it could not move anymore. And the AI would get it stuck all over the fucking place because the AI is just relentlessly spamming commands. So that was another case where I ran in. Armageddon Onslaught, really, the main core of that was I had a lot of questions over the years. Can I do projectiles that move and change their movement speed? Turns out you can't. Can I do this? Can I do that? So about 90% of what I tried to do couldn't be done. The other 10% needed very, very major compromises to work out. So you ended up with a lot of stuff that at the time was pretty much unheard of, because there was nobody doing reverse engineering or anything like that. There was nobody making mods or anything like that. There hadn't been for years. So a lot of this stuff was only loosely explored in War of the Magi, which was the last of the really any reasonable Korean mods. And I really took that as a framework and took an extra step and say, hey, this is what we can do when we have a limit expander and we chew up a lot of resources. I used multiple tile sets and stuff like that to fill my image slots needs. Sins of a Solar Empire and stuff like that were all sort of stories where I had a lot of projects that it was just this looks like it's possible to do, but it actually isn't. Age of Wonders 2, again, a lot of those came down to just stuff being hard-coded that shouldn't be. In Sins of a Solar Empire and Age of Wonders 2, in both those games, the AI is actually completely hard-coded. You do not have access to anything that the AI does at all. No build orders, no priorities, nothing. Actually, literally nothing. And
Nice.
since there's Solar Empire, there's some header values you can change that do not actually do anything really. They change some very minor things that you cannot even predict. So they're not very good. But yeah, they're all completely hard coded, start to finish. So sometimes you don't really realize this stuff until you actually like get into it and you realize, oh my god, what have I got myself into? And StarCraft 2 as well. I talked about the StarCraft 2 stuff, so I'm not really going to rehash that.
Yeah.
But Unreal 4 is actually like the first time that I've been able to sit down and say, okay, what I want is possible. It's just a matter of figuring it out.
Well, it's a positive way to segue into that anyway. I don't know if you feel like talking a little bit more about your Unreal stuff as far as like...
I can. Do you have anything specific you want me to talk about?
Well, as far as it pertains to this, I was wondering if you had made any headway as to figuring out in your sort of bestiary the kind of stuff that you were going to be dealing with as the player, like fighting against certain compositions or whatever, and ways that the players... I mean, you said you weren't interested in making like a skill tree that is like a tech tree where you have resources that you spend, like Dante's Inferno and the God of War games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what is, I guess in that place, before I talk about bestiary and stuff like that, and enemies that you're going to face, what are you planning on doing for player progression?
I want the player's skill to be their progression, actually. So the way I'm trying to design the movement system in this is, since I'm not really using much in the way of input combos, I'm trying to wrap my head around how to design a combo system where you can interchange your different attacks and ability types. So the way that your abilities work right now is you have a set hotkey that's assigned to certain attacks. So G would be your heavy attack, and F is your poke. And some of these have sort of like sequence combos associated with them. So F, the first press, is a very fast short-range poke, and the second press is a stronger, longer-range, slower poke. So all these have sort of like windows in which you can cancel out of them and go into other attacks. You're also going to have stamina that is assigned to an instant reset esque ability. If you're familiar with Dragon's Dogma, it allows you to cancel immediately out of any animation, which can lead to some hysterical shit. Well, in Dragon's Dogma, it's really spammable. In this, it's going to be assigned to stamina along with stuff like your dash ability and some stuff like that. So there will be a resource management in that respect for your most powerful utility stuff, because it's all utility, so it's all going to be lumped into sort of the same thing. So you do have to make some decision making in that regards. But
As
overall,
opposed to limiting it with cooldowns and making it overpowered?
Yeah.
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 Nice.
So, if you want to, if you rely very heavily on instant reset to get out of hit recovery or, chain together your attacks, you can. It's just going to make you less mobile, so you have to trade something for it. But you can do that. Or if you want to be more mobile and not use instant reset as much, you will have that option to you as well. So I'm taking something that would normally be like, this is something you'd normally assign to a cooldown because of how strong it is. It's very strong. Instant reset, like I can't even begin to really foresee how strong this movement set is actually going to be, because it's going to be a kind of movement set that none of these games have done before. Because you're going to be very immobile for a lot of it, but you're going to have a lot of mobility on demand. Since I don't have root motion hooked into any of this stuff, I basically have to decide, is this an attack you can use while moving, or is it not an attack you can use while moving? A lot of them you're not going to be able to use while moving, but repositioning yourself is going to be a lot easier than a lot of these games, because you're going to basically have Dante's Trickster plus Stinger. So you're going to be able to dash around and then perform some short-range teleportation on top of it. This is on top of having air dashes and double jump as well. So if you know what you're doing, you'll be able to navigate around quite a bit. So in regards of like what the player is going to do, what I want progression to scale up is largely player skill. But as you go through the game, it will be very linear in terms of your progression. You will unlock new weapons. So I was actually thinking about that this morning when I woke up. I thought, so I actually found a really, really good two-handed axe graphic I kind of wish I could use for a weapon that this character uses later in the story called the Bloodthirsty Halberd. But I was thinking about this thing, so how would I actually implement this in this game? Because I don't want to implement a system where you're weapon swapping. You're going to have a bow, a great bow, but it's assigned to a very specific ability where you can use it for artillery or you can charge up an attack with it, and it basically immobilizes you. And it's something you need to use for a certain timing or for against ranged enemies or something like that, or to poke things from a range. So, it's something I want you to have to really think to use. It's not something you're going to swap in and out at a whim. So if I implement another weapon like that, how am I going to do that? I don't want it to be something that functions like the great bow. And then I started thinking, well, what if I have a specific ability that's tied to it that you can only cancel to? That then swaps to this weapon for something really specific. Like, let's say, for example, we have our poke abilities. What if I had some way for you to transfer a resource from your initial slow attack that then gets transferred into this, and if you push this cancel, now you access this special ability. And then it could give you an extremely long-range special attack. Like, it could shoot like a flaming shockwave or something like that. Well, that would be kind of neat. So how am I going to get the animations for it? I don't know. But so I was thinking, so we get these abilities like the great bow and all these different kind of like combos and stuff that are not really combos because they flow so freely between each other. It's actually going to take a lot of figuring out to actually not only make the system, but to actually be able to play around it. Like, as a developer, I'm already like asking a lot of questions just in this test build. Like, at what point do I want to use the heavy attack? Right now, I don't put my enemies into long enough hit recovery where it's actually really worth using. But I haven't like fully set up the hit recovery yet either. So at what point do we actually going to use this? So I'm actually going to need to like when I get to I haven't changed all the animations yet, but this thing's animations can be retooled quite a bit. So when I get to making those cancels and you transferring, because the heavy attack is basically it builds up lightning, and when you cancel out of it as opposed to using it, I want you to hang on to that lightning charge until some specific abilities will expend it. And then it'll add some bonus damage and stagger effect to those abilities. So what I wanted is for you to have a resource management in the sense that you commit to something and you get a lot out of commitment. So you have to take like risks, high risk, high reward. And the main risk here is the fact that you're immobile. And a lot of enemies, actually pretty much every enemy is going to be immobile in some shape or fashion. So I guess I may as well just talk about that now since it sort of fits into this. But this dragon that I was talking about, those converting animations for before, it's from Terra. And I'm seeing animations in here for flying and strafing, and then for ground attacks, and I haven't really gone through them because they have so many different transition animations that I don't really fully understand how they work. But there's a few of these larger enemies that would make up what would traditionally be a telegraphic fight within something like God of War, where the boss is immobile and it spawns damage collision, and you have to be there, or jump up on here, or grapple that, and then that's just kind of how you avoid taking lots of damage. And that's never interesting because it's as Simon Says. So always I've been focused on dual fights. But a lot of these boss graphics and stuff like that, they don't work for dual fights. They're big with motion in their root motion and stuff like that. They're designed to be large units that move around. So I thought, okay, so I can make a large unit, a large boss. I have a large arena, that's fine. That's okay. I just gotta make him really mobile and aggressive and not have him static. So I gotta think about how he moves around and stuff like that. And then I think about, so how's the player actually gonna be interacting with this? How am I gonna be interacting with this like a fighting game, but against a large opponent? I thought, well, it's not really that difficult because the player already is gonna have so much movement available to them through their various abilities. You just gotta design the boss's AI and attacks in a way which really demand the player to really actually, plan out where they're going to move and how the resources are going to function. So, I actually want to implement such a unit very early in because I honestly don't know how this is going to behave. I haven't the faintest clue how this is actually going to look like, much less how it's going to play against. So I don't have my short-range teleportation blink in, and the dash is very fucked up because I think I need to actually make a root motion animation for it, which may or may not be hard, I don't know. But with the boss, I have his animations, I have his graphic, that's what I was doing. So I was thinking, well, I could set this in and put it together and see how it goes. But, I want the AI to be capable of, flying around, lifting off, using air attacks, and then landing again all on its own without using, like scripts, basically, like hard set. Like when we look at Skyrim, all the dragons just fasten onto basically waypoints to say, hey, land here. And they kind of just unrealistically swerve out of the air and land there based on very hard set timers and other stuff like that. And then they kind of sit there and chill out, and then they spawn fire, and then they sit there and chill out, and then they spawn fire, and they sit there and chill out. And, it's very static and uninteresting. The dragon fights are just not very good. So if I have a unit like that, I have to take into account quite a few things. Maybe I am going to need waypoints. I'm just going to use a lot more of them. But I also can dynamically find some positions too. So, maybe there's some way I can make all those work together. So what I wanted to look at is I want the player to be like, how do I gauge the player progression from point A to point B? I want them to be able to get to point B for them to feel an accomplishment altogether. I want to set it up in such a way in that the player has to play very well to reach point B. That your success is your progression. I don't feel like there should be some special achievement or some score or some resource or something like that defines your progression. I feel like that the progression in itself is going to be progression. That if you can play well enough to see this dragon and fight this dragon, it's because you did very well early in the game. That you were able to overcome the bosses and other content that it took to actually see this boss. So I want the progression to be very simple. In that you play well, you do well. You don't play well, you don't do well. As you go through the game, you will unlock things like the Great Bow and other stuff like that will give you some more tools and power and utility and stuff like that. But those are basically going to be like the crowns of your accomplishments, as few as they will be. If I add something like this axe in some fashion, that will be another. But currently, it's you will unlock your trickster and other stuff like that fairly early into the game, but after your first bosses, and then you'll get the bow a little bit later on. And then towards the later half of the game, you're going to gain a summon ability that allows you to summon allies. And you will summon the Phantom Army, which are basically a lot of the opponents you fought earlier in the game, actually. So we will tie that in there, in that they are actually your Phantom Army. Just for some reason, you're fighting them now, for some reason. But later on, you gain control of them again, and you can summon them. So that's something I haven't even thought the mechanics of. I just thought, wouldn't it be cool if you can summon your own allies? And now you have a little bit of a strategic element to it. It would definitely add another dimension to the game that I have to think about a lot. But it's something that, the current framework would actually support. You just need a way for the AI to be able to find enemies and then engage them. But you can have the player summon spawners. It would be kind of like almost like Sacrifice in a way, if you've played that, where you can summon units, but you're running around in an ARPG kind of setting. But not really the same in most respects. But that would be one major stage in the game where we suddenly add another massive dimension. So to reach to that point, I want you to really have to work for it, because I think that overcoming challenges and stuff like that is its own reward if it's well set up, if it's well configured. So I'm focusing needlepoint on that one thing: is what does this actually feel like to play with? And then how can I make my enemies fight the player? And how does the player fight the enemies? And I want that to be fine-tuned to such a point that you're not going to even be asking for any kind of progression mechanics. That you're just going to be wanting the next challenge. You're going to be wanting the next hurdle to overcome, because there is definitely a desire for that within people who play these games. There's a lot of these people who still play DMC3 and try to master animation canceling and combos and stuff down to a fine point. These people have long beaten the game on the hardest difficulty. None of the game offers even the slightest bit of difficulty than whatsoever. What they're pursuing is absolute mechanical perfection. And what I want to say is, I want you to have to mechanically perfect this game to defeat the end bosses. So I'm aiming for a very niche sort of mindset in that regards. But I think something that, if it's successful, and I have no idea if it will be, because, I'm no idea what I'm even fucking doing. But if it's successful, then it will be its own reward. And then I'll have accomplished something no other fucking game developer has accomplished outside of shmups. For years and years and years and years and years. There's shmups are really one of the things that they drive for is player expression is its own reward. Yes, you have the high score mechanism and stuff like that track the leaderboards and stuff like that. But that comes as a large part as the culture behind it. The culture for this is a little different in that this is a very centralized needle point thing where I'm thinking, what is personal accomplishment? It should be overcoming a challenge. I shouldn't have to have some kind of reward for it other than overcoming the challenge. I just have to make that challenge worth overcoming. But it's also like early enough in the project that I can't tell you if I'm going to gate certain things. Like the lightning charging thing, that may be something that you unlock later in the game. If it's something that allow you to stack, maybe as time progresses, as you progress through the story, you will unlock more stacks. But at the same time, I avoid open world like the cancer it is. So you won't be able to non-linearly progress through this stuff. Maps and stuff will be large, but they're divided by zones. So you defeat a zone, you maybe unlock something. Anything more than that, I think is really unnecessary. I think that focusing predominantly on the engagement concepts and making the combat enjoyable will be the driving force behind progression.
Okay, so my other sort of, I guess, pinpointed question is, do you think it's possible to design an RTS or some other type of game, other than an ARPG, like what you're trying to do, that follows that precept and
yes,
is able to make it so that you don't need tech tree progression? Your mechanics stay exactly the same as they are from the first mission to the end, and still provides the same degree of challenge.
With a tech tree, that becomes a lot harder. If there's a way, I don't know it. Not right now. Because, like I said before, I was actually increasing the amount of tech that you had to deal with. We were going up to like tier 10. I wasn't reducing it, I was increasing it. So to go in the opposite direction, you become an RTT and not really an RTS, I think.
Well, the idea would be that you keep the tech tree, but you make it... I guess, would it be possible to make it so that, despite the fact that you don't know anything about the game when you first pick it up, you have your tech tree, and from the first mission to the last mission, all the tech is available, and the experience is driven by improvement of your skill rather than discovery of additional mechanics.
Yes, I think that's possible, because that's what drives people to play StarCraft for 20 years. Is they've been playing the same game with the same tech tree, the same units, the same assets, the same sound. Everything has been the same since 1998, and people are still playing it religiously. Is it possible to make a campaign built on those philosophies? Absolutely. Would it be difficult? Yes. It would be very difficult, because you rely more than ever on the AI to do its job, and more than ever on your map design to do its job. You don't have any stop gaps at all. You absolutely must have some kind of functionality in there for the AI to, play competently and scale up as time goes on with the player. So yes, I absolutely think it's possible.
Cool. Well, let's see if somebody can do it then. Sounds like it would be a nice project to work on. The thing is, I guess, as a closing thought, as far as the whole tech trees are concerned, is I do think that they have a place insofar as you, like, when you're making a new tech tree, you need some onboarding time to experience it. And I guess that's probably the sticking point with my hypothetical right there. Is it possible to have it just everything is unlocked from the first mission? I prefer.
Well, I've always felt bad about hard unlocks. Like, obviously, Warcraft 3 is a really bad example, but the fact that the tech tree is just fucked with every single mission, that's terrible. And the thing you bring up where you talk about, not having a limited tech tree, that's something I toyed with for a long time for Apex, is, do we have a justification for your current tech tree even being locked in the first mission? The reason why I lock the tech tree in the first mission is actually because of what you talked about earlier, where, there's a lot to take in at once, so we try not to overwhelm the player. That's actually the main reason why I don't let you access every single thing in this tech tree in the first missions. Is because
it's a logical thing to do.
In.
Because not only is it a lot to learn as a player, but if my assumption as a player is if there's a unit unlocked, I'm expected to use it, or it should be expected that this is a way that I can win. And even if, like, arguably you can win, if your whole tech tree is unlocked and you have 10 tiers of tech, like you were describing, or even more commonly, something like where you have the 3 or 4 tiers, the idea that you're going to be able to use all of those tiers in the first mission, that sounds like a fairy tale as opposed to something that's a reality.
Yeah. But also at the same time, I think that the insinuation that because I unlocked something, it's expected to be the key to win the mission is a gimmick that...
it is, yeah.
And a belief that people that they've fallen into believing this because of Blizzard. Because that's what Blizzard does. They unlock a mission, they give you a unit, and they say, this is how you win the mission. And you just build nothing but that unit and you win it. That's a trap that Blizzard has stuck people in. It doesn't have to be that way. Blizzard does it because they're uncreative. They're creatively bankrupt to the core. They have never, ever tried to design single player with anything regarding any kind of actual engagement in it. It's always been gimmicks from the start. It's just before they were less competent about it. So some of the other staff kind of like slept in something that sort of resembled an RTS here and there, but they've always been about bullshit, and it's a trap to think that way. And unfortunately, that trap does shape people's perspectives. Things have been this way forever, so why would it be different now? That's a question you ask yourself a lot when you present this to a general audience. Is you're doing something different, so why would they perceive it as different than before? You have to lead them in some direction to perceive it as differently. That's a very strong argument for not limiting your tech tree. But also in my campaign, you are actually going to change tech trees completely several times throughout it. You would first start with the Gracian tech tree, then you would move to the Iron Devils, and then eventually you'd move to Black Squadron. So in a hypothetical sense, you could unlock those full tech trees for the player when you're actually introduced to them, and not really worry too much about it.
Yeah, especially if they had been seen beforehand as an enemy or an ally or something, so that the player had at least some knowledge of what they were. Like, the thing is, like, my hypothetical example of something like Hydra is even cheating in then, because most people who are... I imagine virtually everybody who's going to play it has played StarCraft competently enough and frequently enough to have an in-depth knowledge of what the fuck is going on with the races. And so, they're going to notice when something is different. And they also have some preconceived notions about what the races actually do. So that's another thing that's, like... difficult to draw parallels to, just on the basis of it being a mod as opposed to a brand new sort of setting with brand new races and brand new mechanics, preconceived notions and all that.
Well, that's why I was thinking about this axe, and I was like, so let's say I put this axe in as something you cancel too. We're going to be pretty far in the game, so we're going to expect that the player has at least some kind of grasp on your movement set at this point. But is there some way we can tell the player what the axe is without actually giving them any information about it at all? And the axe is actually on this graphic I pulled out, and I was looking at the axe, and I was like, hey, this really closely fits my concept. I didn't think I'd actually ever see something that actually looks like that, but here it is. And I thought, well, why don't I have you fight this unit or something that uses the axe and let it do stuff? And then the player sees that, and then they pick it up, and then it unlocks your ability. You'll probably get a UI notice or something like that says your button's now available, and then you use it, and it behaves just like it did for that unit. So your movement will be different because you're using a different movement set. You're a different unit, but the way that the axe behaves can be basically the same. It can spawn more damage or be slower and deal more damage or whatever. Whatever you expect it to do that the unit has done, we can just translate that. So I use that interaction as our tutoring experience to tell you what to do this, and then how you use it will be up for you to discover. You'll have a good idea of what it does, and you'll learn that it's a cancel ability, so you've got to use it off of other abilities or something like that. So that can that can be your way of introducing content, and that is something I've done in RTSs as well. Is introduce stuff through, this was used against you. So like the tactical missile example is one I brought before, where you get bombed and later on you can build those, and now you know how they're used, you know how they function. So, and you know what can fight them too. So now you keep an eye out for SDI defenses and stuff like that. So there's like no introduction necessary at this point because you've already experienced it. Yeah, I'm still on the fence about some things that still sort of forming my opinions and some new, certainly a lot of exploration required and tech demoing required for something like a more narrative driven thing where you have, dialogue and characters and you're trying to paint a realistic depiction of these characters and these battle settings. And,
yet at the same time you want to keep your dialogue to a minimum where possible because of the fact that you want the gameplay to do most of the storytelling for you. Like I'm still on the fence about how to exactly put that together, but I do agree that when it comes to mechanics, like especially if characters have ostensibly like if you're just following a viewport, like you're not actually a player character, like what you were talking about with Apex, you certainly were. Like there was a reason why you were looking at the consoles, because you were like a battle AI, basically like a battle adjutant that was made for this particular purpose. And so the idea that like in the conventional sense where you're just following a character around, like in Consummate's example, you got your infested ghost character and he's seen Terran tech. So if there's some new tech that the Raiders have and he's been fucking around with the Raiders before the campaign's established or before the campaign started, and it's been established that he's been doing that, there's no reason for him to say, check out this new Raider unit or something like that. Like there's no reason for him to even say that. Like he shouldn't even need to say something like that. Just like in a conventional sense, you shouldn't even need to say, we better watch out for spider mines and siege tanks, just because like that's information that the player already knows, but also information that character already knows. So figuring out how to assemble something like that, I think, is important.
If you have a supporting character, you can build dialogue between them.
Oh yeah,
that's how I did it in Apex, basically.
Well, supporting characters are good ways to play off of the existing, like the main characters, and I know that there's ways to do that. But we talked about this at a different episode where I was discussing how to, you want to try to make your dialogue subversive so that it basically establishes multiple things at once, or it accomplishes multiple goals at once without just being dialogue to further the characterization. You also want it to be dialogue that fuels some element of storytelling that's exactly pertaining to the game. Otherwise, why are you listening in on this dialogue if it has no gameplay ramification, or if it doesn't reinforce something that you can also get from the gameplay in some small part? So it shouldn't like spell shit out for you, obviously, but it should help you, like, help reinforce the themes of the mission. It should help reinforce the themes of the story. It should help reinforce the characterization of these characters that are speaking. It should help reinforce some element of the game itself that the gameplay also reinforces. And, as much as it can do that, as that's going to be good. But at the same time, you don't want it to be dominating the space to the point where the player is trying to, really take it in and be engaged by the dialogue, while also trying to like play their game. That goes back to action economy, a bunch of other shit that we were talking about earlier in this episode. So certainly makes sense. But before we jump into another 8-hour tirade, I did want to just give my closing thoughts on Techtrees themselves. For sure, Techtrees are like an important part of an RTS, I would say. Without a Techtree, like you said, you basically end up becoming an RTT. So tend to want to avoid those. Just maybe that's my personal preference. I just definitely think that there's more to get out of an RTS. And as far as a single player campaign is concerned, or an AI driven experience where you're playing co-op versus AI or something like that, there's a lot of potential for your tech trees to be a huge pivotal part of how the player ends up defining their strategies, especially when you are modding or you're using some sort of existing IP as a basis, right? So I think that there's a lot that you can say about tech trees, that you can take them in negative spaces where they really hurt you, like cooldowns, and you can take them in positive spaces where they promote engagement. And hopefully that this cast helped you understand how exactly to do the latter as opposed to the former, and not go the Blizzard route. But I guess in short, you would say avoid cooldowns and other things that directly inhibit engagement, and focus mostly on designing your units around behaviors and things that are a bit more positional in nature, things that are a little bit more perhaps you would say automated, but like the impact is requires some sort of micro and some sort of positioning in order to get the bulk out of it.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's something that, like, obviously this is a very surface level discussion at the point.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to get into really like a lot of technical stuff without getting very wordy, but I talked a lot about it, and I still have hardly breached it. So specific examples will probably be brought up some cases, especially as I go deeper into my project development. I actually start implementing those different movement sets and stuff like that, and start thinking more about actually interactive features and implement one of these more complicated units and figure out stuff like units teleporting around. We can talk about some of the more specific stuff, but Techtree is really big in many ways because it is larger than the scope of the actual like individual game. So that's one of the reasons that makes it kind of hard to approach when you really start to break it down, because you have to talk about like what is a progression mechanism, and I think that is a good subject for another podcast, is what actually is progression.
Yeah, and we could talk about it as it pertains to scale, but also as it pertains to player choice and expression. So we can figure that out for sure. That might even be our next stop on this magical journey. But yeah, I think it's a decent enough primer, although a bit all over the place. And hopefully you guys enjoyed Mesk yelling.
Yeah, that's it. So. Me getting mad.
Well, I got some new mixplay quotes, that's for sure.
I also heard Deputy Dad taking a stop outside your house. He heard you were having some unsolicited dog shit exchange going on.
Yeah, I swear it was the other people in this house, officer. I'll do anything to stay out of prison.
Covered in shit.
Well, that one I can't explain. Must have been playing StarCraft 2 again.
Must have been swimming around Metzen's toilet, filled with razor blades.
I'm on the edge
of a bloody stool.
Yep. Bye.